Parents falsely accused my brother of doing something inappropriate with my sister's clothes and called him a predator, but it turned out their dog was the one taking her clothes. My brother is 15, my sister is 17, and I'm 23F. This is really stupid and it shouldn't have happened, but it did. Now I just want advice on how to make it better. Also, this is the story my brother told me as I wasn't there. He was in his room playing on his phone minding his own business. He got up to take out the trash. He came back to lay down on his bed. As he was laying down, he noticed their dog walking out of his room. He ignored it. Later on, his sister 17 noticed clothes were missing. She went looking for it and found it in my brother's room. The problem was that his was wet and slimy. She immediately told our parents and they thought the worst. My dad, mom, and brother argued about it. Rude things were said. Apparently mom said I knew you were weird but not this weird. My dad said I raised a predator. In the end, my parents asked me to pick him up and let him stay with me for a couple of days. When I picked him up, he didn't say anything and just sat in silence. He spent the entire time in the room he was staying in. He only came out for dinner. He skipped breakfast and lunch. His eyes were always red when he came out, so I assume he was crying. I've never seen him cry. Most of the time when he's upset he just has a stone face, so what they said must have got to him. Finally, at the end of the week, his parents called me and said they wanted to talk to him, so they came over. Before they came over, I tried to talk to him, but he ignored me. When parents came, they apologized to him. Over the week they noticed more of sister clothes in his room until one day my dad caught the dog with my sister clothes. My brother just said okay and went home. I tried to ask my parents if he could stay longer, but they said that wouldn't be necessary. Later on, I got a call asking me what did he do over my house because he's just been in his room all day at their house. Is there anything I can do to help him feel better? Advice would be greatly unappreciated. Edit. Good news. He can stay with me until Sunday. I had to lie a little to parents to get him to come. I told them he should get out the house because he spends most of his day sitting in one spot with online school. They didn't believe me at first, but I said it would be a chance to get him out his room. They finally agreed. He was about to go to sleep, so I came just in time. I think the plan right now is to just spend time with him this week. I'm broke, so it's gonna be mostly home stuff. I tried to talk to him on the car ride. I asked him if he's okay. He said he's fine and we had a little conversation about his school. So at least he's talking now. He's in the spare room, so everything is okay right now. Comment where Op has replied, comment, poor fellow. Your parents seriously attacked this kid, and to think they can just say I'm sorry and everything be fine is mind-boggling. They destroyed any trust he had in them, and this will not be an easy fix. It appears they had their minds set before even accusing him, thanks to your other sister. Yeah, he probably doesn't have much use for her either right now. Your brother needs space and time to heal. Being at home and being made to interact with this right now is punishment, even though they are his parents and sister. If I were you, I'd tell my parents what they did was inexcusable. I'd talk to him one-on-one and see if he wanted to stay with you for a few weeks. He's 15, being accused of creeping on his sister really put a dent in his self-esteem and self-worth. He needs time to heal. I would also tell him you were there for him no matter what. He will eventually seek affirmation that he's not the weirdo he was labeled. Be there for him. As for your parents, good grief, they need counseling, and your sister probably does too. They made their beds by striking him down so harshly, now they'll have to deal with it a while. It's tough being a 15-year-old kid without these accusations. He really got put behind the 8 ball with this situation. I hope the beat for him. Op, if I were you, I'd tell my parents what they did was inexcusable. I did tell them that was fucked up. They don't see it though. They tried to pass it off as they were just upset in the moment, but I wasn't buying it. Talk to him one-on-one and see if he wanted to stay with you for a few weeks. Sadly, he's ignoring my calls and texts. I am thinking about just driving to see him though. And if he wants, he could stay with me for a while. I'm with him. I don't really know why they went all in on him. There has to be something larger happening if they can say all those things and not care how he feels. But they do need some help too. Update, this is going to be the only update. It's long. So I've been asked to update the situation. Many of you guys asked that I let brother live with me, but I had to take him back to our parents' house this morning. The last update I gave was when my brother was allowed to spend the week at my house. That was last Sunday. We spent the first day, Monday, at my house just talking. He spent most of the time in the room. At first he wasn't responding back. It was going nowhere quickly. So I ended the conversation by telling him our parents were wrong and that he is not weird. I didn't say it exactly like this, but I hope you get the point. He just had a stone face and we stopped talking. Tuesday he still didn't really come out of the room. I offered to go to McDonald's and he came out the room to eat at the table. We just talked about random different things. He wasn't really interested in the conversation until we started talking about my Xbox. We eventually started talking about Madden. He started talking about how good he is at the game. We finished eating run, he went back to his room. Wednesdays I bought Madden. I don't play sports game. I play games like Cuphead or cartoon animated games. I asked if he wanted to play and he agreed. I know this is serious, but Madden absolutely sucks. The game started cheating as soon as we started. The first thing my player did was fumble the ball. He was caling me at it. He actually laughed a couple of times, and he seemed to be enjoying himself. We spent a good portion of the day just playing. Thursday was pretty much the same as Wednesdays, but he was talking more. I was gonna go to the movies, but COVID is still a thing. We eventually just settled to watching Netflix. He spent half the day in his room, but he is coming out more. Friday I decided to try to talk to him about the situation again. I pretty much told him I would talk to our parents to get them to understand why he was hurt by it. I also took the advice of seeing if he wanted to talk to a professional. He asked me not to ask them about it. He said it was just better if nobody brought it up again. I was a little shocked, but there's not much I could do. We then decided to go to a walking trail. At first he didn't want to go, but I convinced him to come. We just spent more time talking. This also made me realize that I should talk to my siblings more often. He seemed happier. Saturday or yesterday was pretty much us just talking again. We decide instead of Madden to just play random games I had. I don't have a lot, but I think he had a good time. When it was dinner time he got kinda quiet again. I asked him what was wrong. He said he wasn't ready to go back home yet. I didn't know what to say. I asked him if he wanted me to talk to our parents to see what we could do. He just said no again. I pretty much told him he could come to my house anytime he wanted to. That leads us to today. He is back at his house. I was gonna talk to our parents, but I assumed he has a reason for not wanting me to talk to them. I know you guys said something about getting him a therapist, but he said no to the idea. I did call my sister to see how she's doing. She said she tried to apologize to brother, but he ignored her. I don't know what happening with that, but one thing at a time. And that's pretty much how the week went. Overall he seemed much happier than he was last week. I texted him and he wants to come back over sometime next week. This part has nothing to do with my brother, but it's about me. You don't have to read it. I'm gonna be honest with you guys. I have no idea what the fuck I'm doing. I'm only 23, still trying to get my life together. I'm a firefighter, so I'm just glad that we get a lot of vacation time, or else I would have had to work. I know people are thinking if you're a firefighter you should know what to do, and why did you ask what the signs of depression are? I was never trainer on how to deal with somebody actively showing signs of depression. I was trained to help somebody who is in the process of trying to commit suicide, and that training wasn't that good. It was basically try to talk them down and do whatever you can to get them to a hospital. I've yet to use this training. This is why I was panicking when everything was happening. People were telling me he could commit suicide. I know I should have kept a cool head, but it just felt different because it was family. They tell you not to panic, but I'm only human. I've been a firefighter for about 2 years now. Anyway, something else I wanted to say. I'm gonna try to be there for both my brother and sister, but I made a mistakes too. Somebody brought up the point of when I found out what happened, what was my reaction. I'm ashamed to admit it, but I didn't have one. I thought he was gonna get over it and everything would be alright. I only started caring when I realized that he wasn't acting like his normal self. That when I realized the impact of what they said and how fucked up this all really is. So to the person who brought up this point, thank you. This showed me that no matter how great my actions are looking in front of random strangers, the truth is that I had a similar mindset as my parents. I don't think he's weird, but I guess my time spent around them made me desensitized to the things they say. I'm gonna work to change that because it's not right. So to everybody, thank you for the advice you've given. I see the mistake I've made and I'm 100% behind changing myself and being behind my brother. Comments where Op has replied. Comment 1. You're a great sister. Op smile. I would try to invite him over often, more so than just extending one forever open invitation. It'll make him feel more wanted. Op, I'll definitely try to keep hanging out with him and invite him over more often. I'm also gonna try to hang out with my sister more. I'm gonna try to have a better relationship with both of them. Comment 2. I have no idea what the fuck I'm doing. Sounds like you do to me. You care about your bro. That's all that needs to be done. Have you thought about introducing your brother to your pals at the station? Maybe give him a tour? Op, when I graduated fire school we had like a family day. We brought our family to where we did our training for fire school. So they all know my brother, sister and parents. Comment 3. Whoa, a firefighter at 23? Isn't it hard to get in? Op, not really. I know a 18-year-old in fire school right now. If you apply to the right county, almost everybody gets. However, out of a class of 100 you will notice only about 10 to 15 people will pass the entire thing. Next story. Offered my favorite nephew free housing for college, but my family demanded I include his poor cousin too, so when they started bullying him I ruined the cousin's job interview out of spite. I, F39, am very much not a kid person. I can tolerate them in small doses, but I also find them uninteresting/annoying and don't want any of my own. I'm well aware that some find my child unfriendliness off-putting and can strategically fake it until I make it most of them time. I just prefer to avoid situations/relationships where I'm expected to interact with kids, but when I can't, I radiate don't talk to me energy to deter them and will try to pawn them off/redirect them and escape. I had the good fortune to be the baby of the family during my generation, but as my siblings and cousins started having kids, they resented me for being a deadbeat aunt, as one cousin put it. They kept pushing me to be involved with their kids, and I eventually snapped and told them how I felt about kids in general. Afterwards, I was slowly iced out socially. I stopped trying when I was hospitalized and only one person even bothered to visit, or even call. The one exception was my brother Michael, M43. He never questioned or undermined my decision. He was that one sole visitor when I was hospitalized. He never tried to force his son Adam, M18, upon me, nor did he resent that I didn't take a serious interest in Adam until he was 14. Even when he was in the trenches in regard to parenting, he still made time to call or text, if sporadically. In the present, Adam is the only niece/nephew that I care about. Yes, his cousins did not receive a fair opportunity to bond with me. Yes, I'm playing favorites. I've set up a 10K college fund, I take him out for experiences monthly, and I've given him some pricey gifts, while his cousins get zilch. Yes, this has caused friction in the past, but I've always been happy to be the bad guy. I try to be discreet. Adam has been instructed to attribute the gifts to his father and not me, and I did not tell him about the college fund until a month ago. My latest gift, however, has led to a major fallout. I live in a desirable location in a major city while Michael/Adam lives nearby. Adam was recently accepted to his dream school in said city, but it's out of his budget. I offered to let him live rent-free with me, which would allow him to commute. My house is much close to campus, and thus, afford it. The issue is my other nephew Alex was also accepted into that school, and it's also his dream school. Alex comes from a disadvantaged background while Adam is middle class. Alex won a partial scholarship to said school, but it's still not enough. When he heard about my offer to Adam, he asked, using Adam as an intermediary, to be included. I refused. I've nothing against Alex, but I also haven't talked to him for 15 years, not that we were ever close, and we simply don't have an emotional connection. It would also come at a massive opportunity cost. I rent out my spare bedrooms, and I'd lose $38K in rental income. Yes, this is well below market rate, over 4 years. Most of my relatives are now in arms. They've given the ultimatum that either 1, I extend my offer to Alex as well, 2, I rescind my offer, 3, Adam rejects my offer, or they will go NC with Adam and Michael. They're calling Adam the golden child, he's an only child, say that Alex deserves my help far more, and are tired of my favoritism. They're not wrong about my favoritism, but honestly, IDGAF, about my ex-family. Though I never blocked them or had a big fallout, we've been effectively NC. I value chosen family over people who happen to share my DNA, and we've both made choices that demoted them to the latter category. I'm also of the opinions that aunts and uncles are entitled to have preferences. Furthermore, I don't see what makes Alex more deserving. He certainly needs the help more, but that's not my tab to pay. Adam is in a more complicated situation. Michael is willing to support whatever Adam chooses and refuses to pressure him. Adam and Alex aren't close, but accepting my offer would mean giving up many other familial bonds that Adam does value. Rejecting it means Adam giving up on his dream school. I do feel bad that my offer is forcing Adam to choose. Edit, I can't believe that I have to say this explicitly, but I don't hate kids. They're just not my cup of tea. You cannot like something and not want to throw it into a trash compactor. Update 1, I saw a few questions in my last post that I wanted to address. Why not try to form a bond with Alex now? He comes across as a gold digger and disingenuous, seeing as he was perfectly happy being distant from me without something to gain. Why distance yourself for Alex's parents' sins? I didn't. I just don't have a reason to try to form a bond with him. Just like I don't have a reason to connect with cashier at my local grocery store. Many people that didn't meet by circumstance meet because of a social lubricant that brought them together. Aunt/nephew ties are facilitated by said aunt's ties to the child's parents/wider family, and said ties do not exist in this case. A relationship with Alex might also be a liability if our relatives try to weaponize it in some way, and given that they already tried with Adam, I'll pass. Why didn't you put your bio family on an information diet? I did. Unfortunately, I suspect that Adam slipped up during his excitement at being given the chance to attend his dream school after thinking that he couldn't. I've always stressed the importance of secrecy, but up to this point he's never experienced conditional love, and in his naiveness, believed the best from his relatives. It's a lesson that I wish he'd learned in a different manner, but what's done is done. I did see the suggestion about claiming that I have a long-term lease on my other rooms, and that probably wouldn't work. My relatives would probably demand that I try to break the lease, taking on the penalties, or that Alex and Adam share a room. Could you compromise? Is there a win-win solution for both Adam and Alex? Maybe let them share a room? Perhaps, but you never negotiate with bullies, it sends the wrong message. Also, it would be incredibly awkward and tense between Alex and I, never mind Alex and Adam, who would be living in the same room. Why not just rent out the room, and send Adam the proceeds so he can get a room elsewhere? My rates are well below market value, and it would not cover the cost of a room elsewhere in the area for Adam. I could raise the price to market value, but then I'd have to explain to said potential tenants why they're being charged so much more than the tenant that I already have. I also don't want to raise my rates on principle. I don't like that landlords/private equity are intentionally squeezing the housing market. The only reason why I'm renting out my rooms is because they'd be sitting empty otherwise, and offering them cheaply was a compromise between pragmatism and my values. I actually would have preferred a smaller place, but there weren't any smaller houses that ticked off my non-negotiable requirements. You've no right to feel hurt over being abandoned in the hospital. You push them away. As acknowledged in my post, everyone made decisions that contributed to me going NC. I was disinterested in the center of their world, and they couldn't accept me as who I was. And while I certainly self-selected out of kid-centric events, I repeatedly tried to reach out to arrange kid-free hangouts. Heck, I would have been okay with occasional text/phone calls. That was literally the only way Michael and I stayed in touch until Adam was 7. And the hospital incident didn't hurt me so much as it was the final nail that ended any hope of reconciliation. I was well aware that our relationship was fraying well before the incident. Update: as for the actual updates, Michael, his wife and I were gearing up to have a talk with Adam to discuss his options, go over the pros and cons and long-term effects, reaffirm our support and nudge him in the right direction. It turns out, we didn't need to, though not for the reason that we'd like. Adam called me yesterday, clearly upset. Apparently, his cousins have been talking smack behind his back, saying some really nasty and cruel things and targeting some of his deepest insecurities. Even if he wanted to make peace with Alex, it wouldn't be possible now. I still think that it would be beneficial to have the talk with him though, if only to help process his feelings. It isn't all doom and gloom though. A friend of a friend is apparently an interviewer for a job that one of the nasty cousins has applied for, and asked about a week ago if I knew them. We look similar and have an unusual family name, and had any tea. No, I was not listed as a reference. I didn't know the cousin well enough to comment back then, but now? Guess who's gonna get a call and a warning not to hire that cousin due to bad character? Did I also mention that said job was in a small industry with typically only one employer per area? Yes, I'm a petty queen and I own it. Update 2, I thought it was implied that Adam was accepting my offer and staying with me for college, but yes, he is. Michael, his wife and I had the conversation with Adam to help him process what his cousins did. We assured him that nothing that happened was his fault. He's still sad, but seems to be doing better. Speaking of my plans, I did make the call to the said acquaintance about my cousin. They mentioned that said cousin had been neck and neck with their competition and there was one final, inconveniently timed, for the acquaintance interview, and they outright thanked me for giving them an excuse to cancel. The petty BTCH and me also decided to look up nearby similar jobs and found that unlike one I just blocked the cousin from, they were not unionized, likely mismanaged, and paid considerably less. The cherry on top is that when I told Adam, he seemed really happy, and added that the site for the job that the cousin just lost was a 10-minute commute. His mom scolded me for being childish, but her face said otherwise. Unless something unexpected happens, I expect that this will be the final update.
I returned to Boston on a sweltering summer afternoon, the suburban road leading to my parents' old house still shaded by maple trees just as it was in my childhood. In my hand was a bottle of red wine hastily bought in Manhattan, a small attempt to appear at ease though my heart felt heavy. This year's family gathering was as noisy as ever, laughter mixing with the clinking of silverware against the long table draped in white linen. I sat at the corner, forcing a smile, but a sense of isolation wrapped around me. In the middle of the toast, my sister Vanessa, adjusting her neat brown hair, calmly announced as if she were a lawyer standing in court. Starting next month, The rent for your apartment will rise to $8,600. The whole room erupted in laughter. My parents joined in, my mother's voice cutting sharply. You're grown now, you have to pay the market rate. You can't keep freeloading off your sister forever. I stayed silent, lifting the glass of wine to my lips, the bitter taste brushing my tongue but leaving behind the sweetness of a secret they had no idea about. That very building, the one I had been living in all these years, had already been under my name for months, registered through a company I quietly created. If you have ever felt belittled within your own family, do you think you would be strong enough to stand up and protect your worth? And where are you watching this story from? Let me know in the comments. Hi, my name is Emily Hart, 32 years old, and at times I feel as if my entire life has been nothing more than the faint shadow of my sister. From a very young age, I grew accustomed to being compared, and in everyone's eyes, those comparisons always seemed to work against me. Vanessa, 3 years older, was constantly praised as the shining star of the family. She excelled at school, spoke with ease, was adored by friends, and most importantly, she knew how to make our parents proud. As for me, even back in elementary school, I was branded the tag-along, the little sister who could never be talented enough to leave her own mark. I still remember vividly the family dinners when we gathered around the long oak table in the bright kitchen. A platter of roasted meat sat in the center, its aroma filling the room, yet the taste remains bland in my memory because it was always accompanied by the heavy weight of repeated questions. My mother often turned to me with a look half pity, half reproach, asking, "When will you ever be as stable as your sister?" I was 14, my hair tied hastily, my hands still stained with paint from art class, barely able to swallow a bite of mashed potatoes, before being thrust into yet another comparison. Across the table, Vanessa smiled confidently, boasting about the science project she had just won an award for. My father immediately nodded with pride. "My daughter truly has a bright future," he said. I wanted to share that I had just finished a painting my teacher had praised, but my voice was drowned out by the applause directed at her. My father gave me a quick glance and dismissed me with a short remark. "Painting won't get you anywhere, focus on your studies." My throat tightened, and suddenly the mashed potatoes turned bitter on my tongue. My high school years were no better. I applied to join the architectural modeling team, excited to present my idea of designing a small community garden for the neighborhood. But when I mentioned it at dinner, my father cut me off. "That doesn't sound practical at all. Look at Vanessa. She's about to join the debate team. Someday she might even become a lawyer." I lowered my head, disappointment weighing heavy in my chest. Every time I tried to kindle a spark of my own, my family quickly extinguished it by shining the spotlight back on my sister. I became the one behind the curtain, watching her step onto the stage, waving confidently at the admiring audience, while I silently cleaned up backstage. Yet, among all my relatives, there was one person who truly saw me, my grandmother Ruth. She lived in Brooklyn, in an old brownstone with a wooden spiral staircase and tall windows that caught the afternoon light. Every Sunday, I would take the train from Boston just to sit with her. In the living room, where the faint scent of chamomile tea mixed with aged wood, we spent hours talking about the smallest things. She listened as I shared my dream of becoming an architect, of creating spaces not just to live in but to heal in. She never mocked or dismissed me. Instead, she leaned closer, her eyes glowing with pride. "You don't need to be like anyone else," she said. "You just need the courage to write your own story." On summer afternoons, when sunlight filtered through the lace curtains, Grandma Ruth and I would go through the financial papers she had carefully kept in an old wooden box. She would have me read each certificate, patiently explaining how a house could become a legacy and how wise investments could protect a family for generations. I was only 16, but that feeling of being trusted made me grow in ways no praise from my parents ever could. Grandma taught me that true value does not come from being compared to someone else, but from whether you have the courage to see yourself clearly and walk on your own 2 feet. I remember once crying as I told her how invisible I felt in the family. She gently smoothed my hair and, in that warm, low voice, said, Emily, you are the child who observes most closely, because you know what it is to be forgotten. And sometimes the ones who are least noticed are the ones who understand best how to build and support others. Never underestimate that power. Sitting beside her, listening to the pendulum clock ticking steadily in the quiet room, I felt for the first time that I had a place. Those memories became a source of comfort throughout my adolescence. While at home, I was dismissed as someone extra. In Brooklyn, I was heard and believed in. I carried her words into every small decision, choosing architecture as a path, facing failures with steadiness, and perhaps because of that quiet support. Years later, when opportunity arrived, I found the courage to rewrite my own story, a story that no one but me could decide. After my grandmother passed away, the brownstone in Brooklyn, the only place I had ever considered a true refuge, lost the warmth it once held. My parents quickly made arrangements to divide the estate, and the outcome was no surprise. Control of the property went straight to Vanessa. They said she was more practical, better at managing, and would ensure the family legacy wouldn't go to waste. Meanwhile, despite having a steady job in New York, I was dismissed as someone too irresponsible to be involved in serious matters. The day I signed a lease for a 2-bedroom apartment inside the very house where my grandmother had once nurtured my spirit, I felt as if I were walking into a tragedy already scripted. Vanessa set the rent at $2,400 a month. She called it a family discount, but I knew the truth. It was barely different from the market rate in Brooklyn, a neighborhood growing more expensive by the day. I forced myself to accept it, telling myself that at least I still had some part of my grandmother's presence close by. The apartment was on the 3rd floor, with windows facing a tree-lined street where morning light poured in, making the space feel larger. I arranged it neatly, set my drafting table by the window, and hung a few photographs my grandmother had cherished. To me, it was more than a place to live. It was an attempt to hold on to the last thread of connection with the one person who had always believed in me. But from the very first months, Vanessa's management turned living there into a string of tense days. She sent me reminder emails about paying rent on time, her words always rigid and condescending, as if I were some stranger renting her property. Once, just because my transfer was delayed by 2 days due to a bank error, she immediately cut off the hot water in my apartment. I had to shower in freezing water in the middle of winter, shivering inside the very room that had once been my grandmother's place of comfort. When I called her to ask why, she replied coldly, "You should learn to respect the contract. Family or not, the law is still the law." I wanted to scream back and ask what law allowed her to treat her own sister this way, but in the end, I just hung up in silence. Even the smallest repair requests became excuses for her to force me to cover the costs myself. One time, the kitchen pipe started leaking, and I reported it to her, thinking that as the property manager it was her responsibility. But Vanessa responded with a long email, citing clauses about basic maintenance falling under tenant obligations, and insisted I pay for the plumber out of my own pocket. As I sat reading those cold, lifeless words, it felt like she was no longer the sister who once played with me in our childhood, but a stranger willing to turn everything into a transaction for profit. Every month, when I transferred the rent money to my sister's account, a bitter taste crept into my heart. I wasn't just paying for a roof over my head, I was paying my own sister for permission to stay in the very place that had once been filled with my grandmother's love. On late nights, sitting alone at my drafting table, I would hear her gentle voice in memory. "You don't need to be like anyone else. You just need the courage to write your own story." I closed my eyes and asked myself if I truly had that courage, when even holding on to the smallest measure of respect from my family had become a battle. I knew I could file complaints or take legal action, but I chose endurance. Not because I was weak, but because I had decided to take a different path. I understood that arguing with Vanessa would only drag me deeper into the cycle she wanted to prove me dependent and powerless. Instead, I quietly prepared for the future. I cut down on expenses, saved every bit of income from my architecture work, and at the same time built up a small interior design company I managed on the side. I accepted extra projects after hours, working late into the night, with the light in my apartment often burning until 3 or 4 in the morning. They thought I was being cornered, but in reality, I was quietly gathering strength, waiting for the day I would break free. Living under Vanessa's management was like living in a gilded cage. On the surface, I had a stable apartment in Brooklyn, but inside, every day was marked by a constant sense of being controlled. She had a spare key, and more than once, while I was away on business trips, she entered the apartment without my consent under the excuse of checking the condition. I would return to find my belongings moved, the refrigerator opened, and my papers disturbed. I knew it was her way of sending a message. I was only a temporary guest in what she considered her territory. But there was something Vanessa didn't know. A secret only my grandmother Ruth and I shared. Before she passed away, on a drizzly afternoon in Brooklyn, she called me to sit beside her at the old wooden table in the living room. Slowly, she opened the familiar wooden box where she kept her important documents. This time, along with the usual folders, she placed a thick envelope in my hands. Inside was a savings book with a balance of nearly $280,000. She looked at me with eyes both stern and tender, her hands trembling slightly but her voice steady. "Emily, don't tell anyone about this, not even your parents. This is yours. Use it to create your freedom." I was nearly stunned, my heart pounding in my chest. For years, I had grown used to receiving less, to being excluded from important decisions, and now, for the first time, someone was giving me not just their trust, but a chance to step out from the shadow that had weighed on me for so long. In the days that followed, I lived with a mix of gratitude and a profound sense of responsibility. I didn't waste a single dollar. I continued working full-time as an architect in New York while also taking on small interior design projects to test my skills and build extra income. Each time I completed a job, whether it was renovating a modest apartment or designing a simple neighborhood cafe, I carefully transferred the profits into a separate account. Slowly, I learned how to make money grow instead of letting it sit idle in the bank. Part of it went into stocks of sustainable architecture firms, another portion into a friend's startup. I wasn't reckless, but I was no longer paralyzed by fear either. I knew my grandmother wanted me to stand on my own, and I treated every investment decision as a step in training myself. Over time, my interior design company grew from scattered small projects into a stable business. I hired a young associate fresh out of school but brimming with creativity. Together, we secured a contract to renovate a chain of local coffee shops, and that project brought not only a modest reputation in the industry but also enough savings for me to start thinking bigger. On the surface, I still played the role of the obedient tenant, dutifully sending rent money to Vanessa every month, but behind the scenes, I was steadily turning my grandmother's gift into the foundation of my independence. Then one day, an opportunity I had never imagined appeared. A real estate firm announced that my parents were planning to sell the brownstone to free up funds for their retirement and new investments. The news didn't come to me through family, but through a contact in the industry. For a moment, I was stunned. That house, the place where I carried so many memories of my grandmother, was about to be traded away for numbers on a ledger. I asked myself, if Grandma were still alive, would she agree? The answer inside me was crystal clear: no. I knew this was the moment to turn her words into action. I reached out to a lawyer, an old friend of my grandmother's with whom I had stayed in touch. He advised me to establish a limited liability company, an LLC, to quietly purchase the building without drawing attention. I spent many nights weighing every risk, thinking carefully about what this would mean. Finally, I signed the papers founding Hartwell LLC. The name was no accident. It was a blend of my family name, Hart, and the word well, a well of water, a symbol of patience, of quietly gathering strength to sustain an entire community. A few months later, through proper legal procedures and discreet transactions, Hartwell LLC officially became the owner of the entire brownstone. I paid my parents a fair amount, enough to satisfy them and keep them from asking too many questions. To them, it was just some anonymous investor acquiring the property. As for Vanessa, who was so sure she alone held the reins, she had no idea the real power had slipped from her grasp. She continued signing contracts, sending me reminder emails, still believing she ruled over the building like a little queen. I let her believe it. I wanted her to be comfortable on that imaginary throne, because nothing makes arrogance collapse faster than the truth revealed at the right moment. The irony was that from the day I officially became the owner, I felt lighter than ever when paying rent. Each check I wrote, each transfer I sent, I did so with a smile. Because I knew that money wasn't going anywhere, it was flowing right back into the very company I controlled. I was both the tenant and the landlord, and in that double game, I was the one holding the rules. I continued letting Vanessa manage the brownstone, using her as the perfect cover. I didn't rush to change anything, nor did I reveal a single clue. Quietly, I observed, keeping record of every controlling action, every self-important email she sent me. I never reacted, only saved everything in silence. I wanted to preserve it all for one decisive moment, the moment when truth would erupt, undeniable and irreversible. And while she kept believing I was the weak younger sister forced to bow under her authority, I grew more certain of what my grandmother had told me. That with enough courage, I could write my own story. And that story would begin with this very building. That reunion dinner felt like a courtroom in disguise, with Vanessa playing both judge and prosecutor while I became the accused, put on trial before the entire family. She didn't just rely on words, she had prepared an entire binder, thick with documents, colorful rent charts neatly bound inside. As the clinking of cutlery died down, Vanessa rose to her feet, adjusted her blazer, and spoke with a booming confidence. According to current market surveys, a two-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn averages $8,600 per month. Meanwhile, Emily only pays $2,400. That means she's pocketing nearly $6,000 each month, the money that rightfully belongs to this family. Murmurs spread across the table, a few relatives widening their eyes and nodding as if they had just heard convincing evidence. Vanessa opened her laptop and projected a rent chart onto the large screen in the living room, as if this were a presentation at a law firm. She continued, "I have been responsible for managing this building for years. I have not taken a single extra dollar from my sister, but clearly allowing her to pay such a low rate means I am sacrificing the family's interest to indulge her. Our family cannot keep tolerating this injustice." Her voice rose above the hum of the air conditioning, each word hammered home like a nail into the listeners' minds. A round of applause broke out from the relatives. My uncle, who loved numbers, praised her. "Vanessa is right, fairness must be clear. It shows she is responsible and willing to speak the truth." The clapping continued, a unanimous chorus of agreement. In everyone's eyes, Vanessa was not only the successful elder sister, but also the fair one who sacrifices for the family. And I, sitting silently at the head of the table, was cast as greedy and ungrateful, exploiting my sister's kindness. I scanned the room, searching for a sympathetic look, perhaps from Aunt Marianne, who had hugged me when I cried at 12, or from Cousin David, who once took me to a baseball game so I would not feel alone. But there was none. Everyone was silent or avoiding my gaze. They bent over their salad plates, slicing turkey with focused attention, as if their silence were a shield to protect themselves from trouble. In that moment, I recognized a bitter truth. No one wanted to take my side. No matter how hard I tried, in their eyes Vanessa remained the center, and I was only a shadow. Laughter erupted after Vanessa finished her speech, as if everyone had just watched a successful comedy performance. My mother leaned forward, her tone half joking, half serious. "A grown daughter should know how to pay market prices. You can't keep freeloading off your sister forever." The table burst out laughing again, and within that noise, I could hear the pounding of my own heart, each beat sharp, painful, and cold. Yet not a single muscle moved on my face. I sat still, calmly lifting my wine glass to my lips as if nothing had touched me. From the handbag beneath the table, my phone buzzed softly. I glanced at the screen, a message from my lawyer, on the way. I drew a long breath, my fingers tightening slightly around the glass. The calm inside me wasn't born of resignation, but of certainty. I knew I held the trump card. All I had to do was wait for the right moment, and the game would flip entirely. Vanessa kept talking endlessly, presenting charts as though delivering her final prosecution. She ended by sliding a stack of contracts across the table toward me, her face triumphant, the diamond ring on her finger tapping against the table edge like a drumbeat of command. "Sign it, Emily," she said, her voice sharp and cold, not the advice of an older sister, but the order of a judge. "Sign it in front of everyone to prove you're no longer freeloading." The room fell silent. Only the low hum of the air conditioner remained, and dozens of expectant eyes bore into me. My parents stared at me with disappointment, as though I had dragged this farce on for far too long. I picked up the pen and lowered the tip to the page. The air seemed to freeze, relatives holding their breath in anticipation. Vanessa leaned toward me, her lips curling into an early smile of victory. But instead of signing, I lifted my head, looked straight into her eyes, and said, my voice calm yet resolute, "No." The faint clink of the metal pen dropping onto the table sounded like an explosion. The entire room fell silent. I could feel every stunned gaze, every breath caught in shock. An aunt blurted out, "What?" while my uncle coughed abruptly, startled. Vanessa froze for a moment, then her face flushed red with rage. She slammed her hand against the table, making the glasses rattle and ring. "You don't have the right to refuse. This is family property, and I am the manager. You must obey." I did not flinch, did not tremble. I only tilted my head slightly, my voice steady and measured as if I were presenting at an architecture conference. "It's you who has no right." A wave of murmurs swept through the table. Relatives began whispering, some glancing around in confusion. My father frowned, his tone hard and clipped. "Emily, stop arguing here. Sign it, don't embarrass the family." My mother folded her arms, her gaze icy and unyielding. But I did not waver. At that tense moment, the doorbell rang. The sharp sound echoed through the house, freezing everyone in place. I set the pen down on the table, calmly stood, and walked toward the door. My high heels tapped steadily against the wooden floor, each step reverberating in the heavy silence. When I opened the door, a man in a dark blue suit stepped in, carrying a heavy leather briefcase. It was Mr. Bennett, my lawyer. He nodded to me first, then turned to face the family with the polite yet piercing gaze of someone well-versed in courtroom battles. "Sorry to interrupt," he said, his voice clear and confident. "I was invited here to clarify a few matters regarding the ownership of the building where Miss Emily currently resides." The room erupted in shock. Vanessa shot to her feet, her voice cracking. "Ownership? Who are you to interfere in this?" But before she could take another step, Miss Bennett placed his briefcase on the table, opened it, and drew out a thick stack of documents, each neatly clipped and labeled with colored tabs. He calmly spread them out right beside Vanessa's contracts. I returned to my seat, folded my arms across my chest. Vanessa glared at me, her eyes burning with fury and a flicker of fear. "Emily, what are you doing?" she demanded through clenched teeth. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I took a slow sip of the wine left in my glass, then said softly, "I'm not doing anything, just laying out the truth." Mr. Bennett did not rush. Every movement was deliberate, steady, as though he was well accustomed to commanding the attention of an entire room. He drew out the carefully prepared files, flipping each page before placing them neatly on the long table. "This is the certificate of ownership from the New York Land Registry, fully notarized," he said, his voice carrying through the silent room. "The legal owner is Hartwell LLC, a company established by Emily Hart 3 years ago." A wave of murmurs rippled across the room. Relatives glanced at one another, some leaning in to study the bright red seals stamped on the copies of the documents. One by one, Mr. Bennett laid out more evidence: annual tax filings, wire transfers for the purchase, maintenance contracts. Everything was undeniable. As I looked at each document, a rush of emotions rose inside me, relief laced with bitterness. For 3 years, I had quietly shouldered the burden, paying every tax, guarding this secret, so that today the truth could be placed on the table before the very people who had once branded me a freeloader. Vanessa staggered back, as if struck in the chest. Her voice cracked as she stammered. No, this can't be. I manage this building. I've handled everything all these years. Her eyes darted desperately around the room, seeking solidarity from our parents, from the relatives, but all she met were uneasy, doubtful stares. I tilted my head, my voice calm but each word dropping like a stone. Yes. You manage it. But have you ever asked yourself who are you managing it for? The question cut through the air. Every whisper died at once, as if the entire room had frozen solid. Vanessa stood rooted to the spot, her lips moving but no words coming out. My father slumped back in his chair, his hand trembling as he held a glass of water he couldn't bring himself to drink. My mother's face had gone pale, her eyes fixed on the seals stamped across the documents, as if staring hard enough might make them vanish. Mr. Bennett continued, his tone objective, professional. To clarify, every property tax for the past 3 years has been paid by Hartwell LLC. All major maintenance expenses from electrical systems and plumbing to fire insurance have been fully covered by the company. What Miss Vanessa refers to as sacrifice is, in fact, merely management work the company allowed her to carry out as a temporary representative. A few relatives gasped audibly, too shocked to contain themselves. I saw Aunt Marianne raise a hand to her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief. Uncle David leaned back in his chair, shaking his head and muttering, "My God, all this time." Vanessa's voice broke into a furious scream. You deceived everyone. What game are you playing, Emily? Did you do this just to humiliate me? I turned to her, meeting her eyes directly without the avoidance that had defined my childhood. No, Vanessa. I didn't deceive anyone. I simply stayed silent and did what needed to be done. The one who deceived others is you by painting yourself as a martyr while living in an illusion of power that only existed because someone allowed it. The murmurs rose again, but this time they carried no support. Instead, they were filled with doubt and quiet reproach. So that's how it is. Unbelievable. Poor Emily. The air in the room shifted, like a sudden change in the wind's direction. My father finally spoke, his voice rough and uncertain. Emily, when did you buy this building? I looked him squarely in the eyes, refusing to turn away. 3 years ago, I used the money Grandma left me, along with what I earned myself. I paid full market price, and every document is legitimate. He lowered his head, his hand trembling as it rested on his knee, saying nothing more. My mother sat in silence, her eyes glistening not from sympathy for me, but from the shame the truth now forced her to confront. Vanessa still tried to shout, "No, I don't believe it, you couldn't possibly have done this." But her voice weakened, as if the evidence spread across the table had already stolen the breath from her lungs. I leaned back in my chair, calm as I delivered the final words. You can still manage, if you choose to do the job properly, but the truth is, the power was never yours to begin with. The room grew heavy with silence. All those who had applauded Vanessa moments earlier now avoided her gaze. The truth, laid bare, needed no further words from me. I simply sat there, calm and steady, letting the silence speak for itself. And in my heart, I heard my grandmother's voice echo. Have the courage to write your own story. Today, that story had turned to an entirely new chapter. After that family gathering, with every document laid out in the open, I knew I could never allow things to return to the way they were. I went back to Brooklyn and stepped into the brownstone my grandmother had cherished this time, for the first time, as its rightful and public owner. I walked through the familiar hallway, past walls stained with old watermarks, up the creaking wooden stairs that groaned under every footstep. Each mark reminded me how, for years, this house had been neglected under careless management. And now, it was my turn to write a new story for it. I called a reputable maintenance company in New York and asked them to inspect the entire building, the electrical wiring, plumbing, heating, and even the roof that had leaked through countless rainy seasons. The workers arrived carrying toolboxes and measuring equipment. They climbed onto the roof, shone flashlights into the old pipes, and replaced worn-out switches. I stood in the middle of the living room, listening to the hammering and drilling, a strange excitement rising in my chest. This was more than just repairing a building, it was the act of claiming ownership, of proving to myself that I was strong enough to protect my grandmother's legacy and transform it into a new source of life. Alongside the maintenance, I contacted an interior design company, the very small firm I had been building for years. I wanted to take this chance to bring my own ideas into the space, more natural light, environmentally friendly materials, and small bursts of greenery on the balconies. I wanted the brownstone to be more than just a residence. I wanted it to breathe renewal, just like the journey I was living through myself. When the first apartment was finally renovated, I listed it at market price. Within 2 weeks, a young artist couple signed the lease. They looked around at the sunlit room and exclaimed, "It's hard to believe this was once such an old, neglected building." I smiled, pride swelling inside me. The next apartments were rented just as quickly, and with each contract I signed, I felt as if I were laying down another solid brick in the foundation of my independence. With Vanessa, I had no intention of evicting her right away. I knew doing so would only create more noise and give her an excuse to keep playing the victim. Instead, I sent her a new lease, this time under my name as the owner. The rent was no longer a so-called family discount, but the full market rate, just like every other tenant. When she received the contract, Vanessa called me, her voice shaking with anger. "Who do you think you are, sending me this?" I answered calmly, "The landlord. And you have 2 choices, sign or find somewhere else." There was a long silence on the other end before the line abruptly went dead. In the weeks that followed, I saw less of Vanessa. She avoided me in the hallways and stopped sending the overbearing emails she once did. I knew she was scrambling to figure out her next move, but this time the power was no longer in her hands. And I no longer felt that old fear whenever a message from her appeared, because every word, every demand, now echoed hollow and powerless. The strange thing was that throughout this process, I didn't feel the triumph I once imagined. There was no moment when I wanted to stand above her and laugh at my victory. Instead, what I felt was relief. Relief that I no longer had to live in an apartment where every dollar I paid was laced with bitterness. Relief that, for the first time, I could decide for myself what happened in my own space, from how to hang a picture to signing leases with new tenants. Relief that, at last, my grandmother's words had come true. I had found the courage to write my own story. At night, standing by the window of my apartment and looking down at the street glowing under the yellow lights, I saw streams of people passing by, strangers' faces, yet all full of life. I thought about how this house would soon welcome new residents, people unconnected to the old wounds but who would help form a new community. In my memory, I saw my grandmother smiling, her kind eyes watching over me from somewhere unseen. I also began setting new boundaries, not just with Vanessa but with my parents as well. I no longer allowed them to pull me into arguments about family bonds or duty. I told them directly, I will not let anyone belittle me again. I still respect family, but my boundary is fairness. My parents stayed silent, neither opposing nor acknowledging me. But for me, that no longer mattered. I had long since grown used to living without their praise. What I needed was peace within myself, and for the first time, I found it right here under this roof. In the days that followed, as the sounds of drills and hammers gave way to the quiet of a house being renewed, I walked down the freshly painted hallway and breathed in deeply the scent of wood and new paint. I felt as though my own spirit had been repainted brighter, fresher. No more shadows of comparison, no more weight of mocking words. What remained was only me, Emily, a free woman, building a life of her own choosing. In the first weeks after the new lease was sent, Vanessa kept an unusual silence. I almost thought she might quietly move out, but one evening, just as I returned from the office, my phone rang. Her name lit up the screen, one I knew too well. I hesitated for a moment, then answered. Vanessa's voice was no longer sharp and commanding but subdued, tinged with pleading. "Emily, I know you're angry, but we're still sisters. Can you lower the rent for me? Just by half. You can afford it. Think of it as keeping our bond." I froze for a moment, listening to her repeat the words, "We're sisters." But in every syllable I didn't feel connection, only an excuse to continue taking advantage. I drew a deep breath and replied firmly, "No. This isn't about affection, this is about boundaries. I won't diminish my own worth just to make you comfortable." No. There was silence on the other end for a few seconds, then it shifted into her familiar tone of irritation. "You're so selfish, Emily, you've changed. You weren't like this before." I gave a bitter smile. "No, Vanessa, I just stopped letting you write my story for me." I hung up before she could say another word. A week later, Vanessa officially refused to sign the lease. She packed her things and left in anger, not even bothering to say goodbye to anyone in the building. I stood by the window, watching the moving truck carry her belongings away from the street. My heart felt both relieved and faintly sorrowful. Relieved, because at last there would be no more condescending emails, no more heavy footsteps in the hallway that made me hold my breath. But sorrowful, because the bond of sisterhood, distorted as it was, had now ended in this way. I thought things would settle down, but soon after, my parents began calling me. My father's voice was heavy, laced with fury. "You destroyed family ties over money. Do you know how much your sister is suffering? You're so heartless, Emily." My mother added, "Even strangers know how to care for one another, and yet you can't even care for your own sister. Living this rigidly, how can you ever be happy?" I listened without interrupting, but a storm of emotions churned inside me. In the past, words like these would have been enough to keep me crying through the night, convinced I was the unfilial daughter, the one who ruined harmony. But this time was different. I sat upright, my voice calm. "If you think love can be measured by rent money, then maybe that love never truly existed." The conversation fell into silence. I heard a sigh, then the click of the line being hung up. I knew that from now on the distance between my parents and me would only grow wider. Yet, strangely, I did not collapse as I once would have. I felt steadier inside, as if at last I had learned to stand without needing their approval. In the days that followed, relatives began to gossip. Some called me half reproachful, half sympathetic. Others sent messages. "After all, you are sisters, you should give a little." But there were also a few who whispered privately, "Emily, you did the right thing. Vanessa has long treated you with contempt." I no longer bothered to prove whether I was right or wrong. I understood that the issue was never really about money. The problem was that for many years I had been treated as invisible, demeaned to the point that all my worth was denied. And when I stood up to defend myself, they could not accept it. At night, after work, I often sat on the building's stoop. Wind rustled through the trees, and the streetlights cast a glow against the old brownstone walls that were slowly being renewed. I thought about family, about the growing distance. Of course it still hurt. Deep down, I had once longed to be seen and loved. But now I knew I was no longer bound by that need. I had a choice, to choose dignity over cheap approval. The brownstone stood silently, like a witness. 3 years ago, it had been a burden, a symbol of oppression. Now it was the emblem of the freedom I had claimed with my own hands. And every time I walked through the clean hallways, inhaling the scent of fresh paint, I remembered my grandmother's words. "Never underestimate your strength." I smiled to myself. Because at last, I understood that strength was not about revenge or proving myself superior. True strength was daring to live by my own worth, even when my own family turned their backs on me. One late autumn evening, as I returned from the office, the Brooklyn streets glowed under warm yellow lights. The air was crisp, maple leaves scattered across the sidewalks, painting a scene that made the heart grow heavy. I stopped at the stoop of the brownstone, adjusting the scarf around my neck. Just as I was about to step inside, I noticed a familiar figure standing near the corner wall. Vanessa. She wore a long black coat, her wavy brown hair falling loose, her face stripped of its usual pride and marked instead with exhaustion. Her eyes met mine, and she whispered, her voice hoarse as the wind, "You've changed." I stood still, looking straight into those eyes that for so many years had only gazed at me with disdain. This time, I felt no hatred, no longing for recognition, only a gentle release. I answered slowly, my voice calm but steady. No, I just stopped letting you write my story. As the words left my lips, the hollow space in my chest felt as if it had finally been filled. Vanessa pressed her lips together, said nothing more, and turned away. Her figure grew smaller and smaller under the streetlights, and I knew that moment marked the end of all the power games, comparisons, and contempt she had once used to bind me. I sat down on the stoop, the same place where my grandmother had often sat with me on summer afternoons long ago. Looking up, I saw the brownstone rising tall in the soft yellow light, both old and renewed after its restoration. It was no longer just property, no longer just a victory in a family dispute. It had become a symbol of the journey I had traveled, from a child dismissed and overlooked to a woman who could stand firmly on her own. I smiled faintly, whispering to myself, the real victory was never about defeating her, but about conquering the fear of being dismissed that had haunted me for so many years. In the days that followed, my life gradually moved into a new chapter. In the mornings, I worked at the architecture office. In the afternoons, I stopped by the brownstone to check on renovations and chat with the new tenants. A young couple had just placed pots of lavender on their balcony, and children's laughter from a neighbor echoed through the hallway. Watching that scene warmed my heart. This was exactly what my grandmother had wanted, a home not only for shelter, but for nurturing life and connection. From time to time, my parents still called to scold me, repeating the same line that I had put money above family. But now I only listened, without harsh replies, and without the sharp pain I once felt. I understood that I could never change how they saw me. And the truth was, I no longer needed their approval. I had learned to set boundaries so that they could no longer define my worth. I began devoting more time to myself. I signed up for a yoga class near my home, joined a book club every Saturday, and continued to grow my interior design business. The projects I took on were no longer just about making a living, but about the joy of creating. I realized that once I stopped being haunted by constant comparisons, my energy became clearer, lighter. I was creating spaces for myself and for others built on sincerity, not on forced efforts to please anyone. Once, I was invited to give a talk at my old architecture school. In front of dozens of young students, I shared my journey. I told them about the times I was belittled, about living like a tenant in the very place tied to my childhood, and about how I eventually rewrote my own story. When I finished, I said, true worth doesn't come from someone else's recognition. It comes from daring to define yourself, from standing tall even when the whole world turns away. The hall went silent for a few seconds, then erupted into thunderous applause. In that moment, I heard my grandmother's voice echoing from memory. You've done it, Emily. On another evening, I sat alone on the stoop of the brownstone, watching the city lights shimmer against the rain-slicked street. A cold wind swept by, yet inside me there was an unfamiliar peace. I closed my eyes, recalling every step of the path, the suffocating family dinners, the nights without hot water, the countless times I swallowed tears instead of speaking back. All of it had led me here, to this moment, where I sat not as someone defined by others' gaze, but as a person free to define herself. I know the road ahead will still hold many challenges, and old wounds will not disappear overnight. But now, I carry them as part of the memory that shaped me, no longer as a burden. I see clearly that true worth does not come from the recognition of a toxic family, but from daring to write your own story. And my story has finally broken free from the pages others once tried to force me into. That night, as I stepped inside my home, the soft golden light filled the living room. I smiled to myself. I didn't need to defeat anyone, I only needed to be myself. And for me, that was the greatest victory of all. To everyone watching this video, if you have ever felt hurt or lost trust within your own family, please remember you are not alone. Life may take away recognition from those closest to you, but it can never take away the true worth that lies within you. Every step you take forward, every choice you make with confidence, is proof that you are stronger than what the past once told you. Believe that you deserve a life that is fair, kind, and whole, and that you have the power to write a new story for yourself. Thank you for listening. See you next stories.
She texted, "Having fun with the girls, don't wait up." Then her friend accidentally sent me a video of her kissing another guy. I replied to her friend, "Thanks for the info." Then I packed her bags and left them with the building concierge. Her walk of shame the next morning was to a locked door. I, 29 male, was watching the game last Saturday night when I got the text from my girlfriend Mia, 27. We'd been living together for about 2 years in my apartment. "Having fun with the girls, don't wait up." Cool, no problem. She'd been planning this girls' night for weeks with her friend group, Zara, Luna, and Kendra. They were supposedly hitting some wine bar downtown, then maybe dancing. I was honestly looking forward to having the place to myself to watch the playoffs in peace. Around 11:30 p.m. I get a Snapchat notification. It's from Zara. Weird, she never messages me directly. I open it, it's a video. Dark club, strobe lights, loud music, and there's Mia, pressed up against some guy in a leather jacket making out like teenagers. Full tongue action, his hands all over her. The caption read, "Get it, that girl." My stomach dropped. Then I realized, Zara probably meant to send this to their group chat, not me. We have similar usernames. I'm TreyB29, their friend Trina is TreyBay29. The video disappeared after a few seconds, but I had already screen recorded it. Sat there for a minute just staring at my phone, then typed back to Zara, "Thanks for the info." She read it immediately. Started typing, stopped, started typing again. Then nothing. My phone started blowing up about 2 minutes later. Zara calling, Luna calling. I declined everything and put my phone on silent. Here's the thing. The apartment is mine. Bought it 3 years ago before I even met Mia. She moved in about 8 months ago. Doesn't pay rent, said she was saving for our future, just covers groceries sometimes and her own bills. Not on the lease, not on anything. I went to the bedroom, grabbed 2 suitcases from the closet, started packing her stuff, clothes, makeup, hair straightener, that stupid decorative pillow collection she insisted we needed. Everything. Took me about an hour to pack it all up properly. I wasn't gonna damage anything, just wanted it gone. By 1 a.m., I had 4 suitcases and 3 boxes packed. Called down to the concierge desk, one perk of a decent building. "Hey Rob, it's Trey from 1204. I have some luggage that needs to be held for pickup tomorrow. Can you send someone up?" "Sure thing, Mr. Benson. Pick up by who?" "Mia Rodriguez. She'll have ID." Got everything down to the concierge. Rob didn't ask questions, just tagged everything and gave me a receipt. Then I went back upstairs and changed the lock code on my smart lock. Takes like 30 seconds through the app. Turned my phone back on to absolute chaos. 52 messages, 18 missed calls. I scrolled through some highlights. Zara, "OMG, Trey, I'm so sorry, that wasn't meant for you. Please don't do anything crazy. Maya doesn't know I sent it. Luna, Trey, please pick up, we can explain. It's not what it looks like." Even Kendra, "Hey, that video wasn't what you think, they're just friends." Just friends. Right? I've got lots of friends, I shove my tongue down their throats. Then Mia's text started rolling in around 12:45 a.m. "Babe, Zara said she sent you something by accident. It's not what it looks like, I promise. That guy is just a friend from work. I'm coming home now, we need to talk. Baby, please answer me. I'm in an Uber, why aren't you answering? This is ridiculous, we're adults." I replied once, "Your belongings are with the concierge. Smart lock code has been changed." Then I turned off my phone and went to bed. Update 1, woke up at 8 a.m. to my phone absolutely losing its mind. Had to turn it off overnight because even on silent, the vibration was keeping me awake. 153 messages, 74 missed calls, 12 voicemails. But the best part? The Ring doorbell footage. 2:20 a.m., Mia arrives, tries her code. Doesn't work. Tries again, and again, and again. 2:20 p.m., starts knocking. 2 a.m., knocking turns to pounding. "Trey, open the door." This isn't funny. She's crying now. "Please, baby, let me explain." She calls someone, can hear her say, "He won't let me in. No, the code doesn't work. I don't know what to do." She leaves. Then, she's back with reinforcements. her mom Lucia, and her sister Isabella. The three of them spent 20 minutes outside my door. The highlights. Lucia, Trey, open this door right now. You can't just throw my daughter out. Isabella, this is illegal eviction. We'll call the cops. Sobbing, I just want to talk to him. They did call the cops. 2 officers showed up around 8:30 a.m. I answered the door in my bathrobe, coffee in hand. Morning, officers. Sir, we have a report of an illegal eviction? No eviction here. My ex-girlfriend's belongings are with the concierge downstairs. She's never been on the lease, just a guest who stayed over. A guest who was filmed cheating on me last night. I showed them the video on my phone. The younger cop tried not to smirk. Ma'am, the older one turned to Mia. If you're not on the lease and he's asked you to leave, you need to collect your belongings and go. This is his property. But I live here, Mia wailed. Do you receive mail here? Are you on any utilities? Lease agreement? Well, no, but then legally, you're a guest. Sir, her belongings? All packed and with the concierge. She just needs to show ID and Rob will release everything to her. The cops basically told them to go get her stuff and leave me alone, or they'd be the ones in trouble for harassment. The look on Mia's face when she realized she actually had to leave? Priceless. But the entitlement was just beginning. Update 2, it's been 5 days since I kicked Mia out, and holy crap, the entitlement is off the charts. Day 1 post-lockout. After the cops left, I thought that would be it. Nope. Around 2 p.m., I get a Venmo request from Mia for $3,500. The description, for my contributions to the household. I declined it and blocked her on Venmo. Then came the text from a number I didn't recognize. Isabella's phone. You owe Mia for 2 years of emotional labor and household management. She gave up opportunities to support your lifestyle. $3,500 is the minimum you owe her. Household management? She couldn't even remember to buy toilet paper without me reminding her. The only thing she managed was maxing out her credit cards on clothes. Day 2. Mia showed up at my work. Security had to escort her out. She told the receptionist she was my fiancée, we were never engaged, and needed to speak to me about a family emergency. When they called my desk to verify, I said I didn't know anyone by that name. According to Jake, the security guard, she lost it in the lobby. Full meltdown. He can't do this to me. I gave him everything. My manager Brad pulled me aside later. I showed him the video of her kissing another dude. He laughed and said, "Say no more, we've increased security just in case." Day 3. This is where it gets good. I get home from work to find my landlord in the hallway with Mia, Lucia, and some guy in a cheap suit. "Mr. Benson," my landlord says, looking annoyed. "This woman claims she's a tenant here?" The guy in the suit hands me papers. "I'm representing Ms. Rodriguez. This is a notice of tenant rights violation." I actually laughed. "She's never been a tenant. Would you like to see the lease?" My landlord already had his tablet out. I pulled it up already. Single occupancy, Trey Benson. No other authorized occupants listed. Cheap suit tried to argue about established residency and common law rights. My landlord shut that down real quick. "She's not on the lease. She has no tenant rights here. And if I see her in this building again without Mr. Benson's permission, I'm calling the police for trespassing." But here's the kicker. As they're leaving, Mia turns and says, "You know what? Keep the apartment, but that guy from the video, he actually appreciates me. His BMW is nicer than your Honda anyway." The manager couldn't help himself. "Then why are you here begging to get back in?" Day 4. Radio silence. I thought maybe she'd finally given up. Wrong. I get a call from my credit card company about suspicious activity. Someone tried to use my saved card info to buy a $1,200 flight to Cabo. The billing address they used? Mia's sister's apartment. Froze that card immediately. Then checked my Amazon, Netflix, Hulu, everything. She'd tried to order about $800 worth of stuff on Amazon using my saved payment info. All declined thanks to the frozen card. Filed a fraud report. The credit card company said they see this all the time with bad breakups. Day 5. Today. This morning, I get an Instagram DM from someone named Rico Suave 89. It's the dude from the video. I kid you not, this man had the audacity to message me. "Yo bro, sorry about the situation with Mia, but she says you're holding some of her jewelry? A necklace worth about $2K? She's too upset to contact you. Can you just drop it with the concierge?" First off, what jewelry? The only jewelry she had was the Pandora bracelet her mom got her and some stuff from Target. I packed all of it. Second, this dude really thought I was gonna buy this? I replied, everything she owned was packed and given to her 5 days ago. If something's missing, maybe check your backseat, bro. He read it and blocked me immediately. But the best part happened an hour ago. Zara reached out. Remember her? The one who accidentally sent the video? She wanted to clear the air. Trey, I'm really sorry about everything, but I think you should know the full story. I'm listening. That guy Rico? She's been seeing him for like 3 months. We all knew, but she said you were emotionally abusive and controlling and she was scared to leave. Interesting. What else? She said you monitored her spending and wouldn't let her have friends over. Zara, she had you guys over literally 2 weeks ago. I bought all the wine. Long pause. Yeah, we're starting to realize she lied about a lot of stuff. Luna found out Mia told her boyfriend that Luna was trying to hook up with him. Kendra's missing $400 that Mia borrowed last month. The friend group is imploding. Love to see it. Update 3 Day 8. Thought things were calming down. Haven't heard from Mia in 3 days. I was wrong. So very wrong. Monday morning, I'm in a meeting when HR calls me in. My stomach dropped. Trey, we received a complaint. We need to discuss this. They show me an email sent to our company's CEO, CFO, and entire board of directors. From Maya. Subject, Concerned Citizen Report, Trey Benson's domestic abuse. She accused me of financial abuse, controlling her access to money, emotional manipulation, isolating her from friends and family, theft of personal property, threatening behavior. She even attached photos, selfies of her crying, a picture of the packed suitcases, and screenshots of my "Your belongings are with the concierge" text. HR lady looked uncomfortable. Trey, we have to investigate any complaint like this, but do you have anything that might help us understand the situation? I pulled out my phone. Showed them 1. The video of her making out with Rico. 2. The ring footage of her pounding on my door at 2 a.m. 3. The text where she admitted the guy was from work, proving she lied about not knowing him. 4. Bank statements showing she never paid rent. 5. The credit card fraud report from her trying to buy Cabo tickets. HR lady's expression went from concerned to pissed. She sent this to the board? Apparently. Give me a moment. She left and came back with legal and my manager Brad. Legal guy looked at everything and said, this is attempted defamation and harassment. We're sending her a cease and desist. If she contacts anyone at this company again, we're pressing charges. But Mia wasn't done. Day 10. I get home to find an envelope taped to my door. It's from Lucia, Mia's mom. Handwritten, 3 pages. The highlights. I corrupted her innocent daughter. I turned her into someone who needs male attention. I'm responsible for destroying a beautiful young woman's future. I should man up and take her back because real men forgive. Rico is just a phase, and I'm the one she really loves. If I don't take her back, I'll be cursed to never find love again. She actually wrote this. The last paragraph, though. Mia has been staying with Rico, but he's already getting tired of her spending and emotional needs. When he kicks her out, and he will, she'll have nowhere to go. This is on your conscience. So let me get this straight. She cheated with Rico, told everyone I was abusive, tried to get me fired, committed credit card fraud. But I should take her back because her new guy is already sick of her? The audacity. The entitlement. Day 12. The universe has a sense of humor. Jake from security texts me, yo, you need to see this. Sends me a TikTok link. It's Mia. She made a whole TikTok about being a survivor of emotional abuse. The video has her sitting in a car, looks like Rico's BMW, crying with sad music, text overlay reading, when you finally escape your toxic ex but he takes everything from you. Starting over at 27 is hard, but I'm a survivor. The comments, though. The comments. Someone found the video of her kissing Rico and posted it. This you sis? Looks like you escaped right into another man's mouth. Another person. Girl, I know you. You owe my roommate $300. And the best one from Kendra. Survivor? You told me you were planning to cheat for months. Delete this. The video got ratioed so hard she deleted it within 2 hours. But the internet is forever. Someone screen recorded it, and it's making rounds in local gossip groups. Day 14. Rico slid into my DMs again. Different account this time. Bro, for real though, You need to take her back. She's crazy expensive and won't stop talking about you. This ain't what I signed up for. I screenshot it and replied, sounds like a you problem. Does she know you're trying to return her like an Amazon purchase? He blocked me again. 20 minutes later, Mia calls from a number I don't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. What? Trey baby, I know you saw Rico's message. He doesn't mean anything to me. I was just hurt and confused, and you've been seeing him for 3 months according to Zara. Silence. That's not. She's lying. She's always been jealous of us. Mia, I don't care anymore. Stop contacting me. Stop contacting my job. Stop the fraud attempts. Move on. But I love you. You love my apartment and my credit card. There's a difference. You're such an asshole. I gave you the best years of my life. 2 years, and you spent them cheating. Goodbye, Mia. But before I hung up, I heard Rico in the background. Yo, who you talking to? I told you not to call him. They're already fighting. Incredible. Final update. It's been 2 months now. Time for the conclusion to this saga. Week 3 after the breakup, Mia and Rico's relationship imploded spectacularly. According to the tea Zara spilled, we're cool now. She genuinely feels bad about everything. Rico kicked Mia out after she tried to add herself to his credit cards, demanded he pay for a girl's trip to Miami, had a screaming match with his actual girlfriend. Yeah, turns out Mia was the side chick. She moved back in with Lucia, who then called me again asking me to reconsider. I blocked her number too. Week 4, I get served with actual legal papers. Mia was suing me in small claims court for illegal eviction, $5,000, emotional distress, $5,000, lost belongings, $2,000, $12,000 total. For what? Being asked to leave an apartment she didn't pay for? I hired a lawyer. Cost me $1,500, but worth every penny. Week 6, court day. I show up in a suit. She shows up in a dress I bought her. I recognized it because I paid $300 for it on her birthday. Her argument: we were in a committed domestic partnership, and I violated her rights by kicking her out without notice. My lawyer's response: she was never on the lease, never paid rent, bank statements proved this, video evidence of infidelity, evidence of credit card fraud, the Cabo tickets, the cease and desist from my company for harassment, text messages where she called herself a guest in my home 6 months ago when arguing about chores. The judge asked her one question: ma'am, did you pay rent? No, but I contributed in other ways. What ways? Emotional support, cooking, cleaning. Do you have any documentation of these contributions? No. The judge dismissed everything except said I should have given her 24 hours notice since she had belongings there. Awarded her $0, but said I owed her 1 day of reasonable hotel costs, $120. I paid it right there just to be done. The best part: as we're leaving court, her cheap lawyer turns to her and loudly says, you told me you paid rent. You told me you had receipts. You wasted my time. He walked off, shaking his head. Week 8, the group chat imploded completely. Luna found out Mia had been flirting with her boyfriend for months. Kendra never got her $400 back. Zara discovered Mia had been screenshotting their private conversations and sending them to other people to start drama. They all blocked her. Isabella, her sister, reached out to apologize. Turns out Mia owes her $2,000 too, and had been lying to their whole family about our relationship. Told them I was rich, I'm comfortable, not rich, and that we were secretly engaged. She'd been telling people we were planning a destination wedding, which is why she needed to borrow money from everyone. Present day, I'm doing great. Started seeing someone new, met her at a buddy's barbecue. Told her the whole story on our 3rd date. She laughed so hard she nearly choked on her wine. Said, at least I know you don't tolerate BS. Mia? Through the grapevine I heard. She's working at her mom's hair salon, the job she quit to focus on our relationship. Rico's actual girlfriend confronted her at the salon. There's apparently video, but I haven't looked for it. She tried to start a GoFundMe for surviving domestic abuse, but it got reported and taken down. She's dating some new guy who apparently doesn't know the full story yet. Last week, I ran into her at a grocery store. She was with new guy. She saw me, grabbed his arm, and loudly said, baby, let's go, my abusive ex is here. New guy looked at me, ready to start something. I just smiled and said, ask her about Rico's BMW, and kept walking. Saw them arguing in the parking lot on my way out. The moral of the story: when someone shows you who they are, believe them. When they text you they're having fun with the girls, then get caught on video sucking face with another dude, pack their stuff and change the locks. The entitlement will show itself, but at least it won't be your problem anymore. Oh, and always screen record Snapchats. You never know when you'll need the receipts. Peace out. Edit: since some keep asking, yes, this is all real. Yes, I kept all the documentation. No, I don't regret a single thing. The $1,500 for the lawyer plus $120 for hotel was worth every penny to get her out of my life. And no, I'm not giving out her TikTok handle. Stop asking.
That evening, when every gaze in the luxurious room was fixed on Vanessa, my so-called perfect sister, I could only stand quietly in a corner, my trembling hand clutching the worn envelope the lawyer had just handed me. Vanessa was declared the sole heir to the entire $18 million empire. The mansion, the yacht, the supercars, the company shares, everything was listed clearly in the will. Applause of congratulations and murmurs of admiration rose like a cold chorus. And me, the child always treated as an outsider, was left with a dusty envelope so thin that everyone assumed it contained nothing more than a meaningless scrap of paper. As I slipped away, mocking laughter still chased after me. That night, in my cramped apartment, I finally dared to open the envelope. What I discovered inside would not only change my life forever, but also expose the darkest secrets of the Carter family. Have you ever been dismissed by the entire world, only to realize that you were the one holding the real key all along? And before we uncover this secret together, I want to ask, where are you watching this story from, and at what time? Hi, my name is Isabel Carter, and I am 29 years old. When people hear the Carter name, they probably imagine I was born into luxury, cradled in the affection of a wealthy dynasty. But the truth could not be further from that. I am the illegitimate child, the one never wanted, the stain on the legacy of a powerful bloodline. I can still recall my mother's face, Laura Miller, though the memory is faint, fragmented like old reels of film. She died when I was only 3 years old in a car accident. Everyone insisted was just unfortunate. Yet, even as a child, I sensed something sinister behind her death. I remember that night vividly, the adults whispering in hushed tones, Eleanor sitting coldly on the living room sofa, and Richard Carter, my father, silently smoking until dawn without uttering a single word. After my mother's death, I was brought to live in the Carter estate in Rhode Island. To the world, that grand mansion was a symbol of power and luxury, but to me, it felt like a gilded prison. Eleanor, Richard's lawful wife and Vanessa's mother, quickly asserted her control over everything, including my very existence. She never allowed me to call her stepmother. Each time I slipped and said the word, her eyes would narrow, her teeth clenched. "Don't you ever give me that title. You are not my child. You are nothing but a burden." From that moment, I understood that in this house spanning thousands of square feet, I had no rightful place. Vanessa, my half-sister, was the complete opposite. 5 years older than me, she was raised by Eleanor as a little queen. From an early age, Vanessa was enrolled in exclusive ballet classes, horseback riding lessons, and given a Steinway piano placed proudly in the center of the living room. Whenever there was a family photo, Vanessa was always positioned in the center, draped in elegant dresses, while I was forbidden from even approaching the camera. This is the image of the Carter family, not a playground for outsiders. Eleanor would say coldly whenever I lingered at the doorway, watching the picture of a family I could never be part of. My room was never a family member's bedroom, but the maid's quarters in the basement, cramped and dark, with an old wooden bed that creaked every time I turned. While Vanessa had an entire suite of rooms filled with imported toys and custom-made princess dresses from Paris, I was given hand-me-down books and clothes from the household staff. I still remember one winter evening, when the family sat at the long, candlelit dining table. I was forced to eat in the kitchen with the servants simply because Eleanor didn't want the image of the Carter dinner table tainted. I was only 7 years old then, too young to fully understand the weight of that humiliation, only able to swallow my tears along with a bowl of cold, watery soup. What hurt the most was not the lack of material comfort, but the erasure of my existence. My name was never called at family gatherings, never introduced to friends or business partners. To the outside world, Isabel Carter did not exist. Richard, my father, though not as openly hostile as Eleanor, kept his distance. He rarely spoke to me, and every time his eyes fell on me, there was a flicker of something unspoken. Part pity, part fear, and something that almost resembled guilt. But he never stepped beyond that cold, invisible barrier to protect me. Vanessa grew up bathed in absolute favoritism. She was taught from the start that she was the rightful heir, the future of Carter Industries. Every one of her achievements, no matter how minor, was magnified by Eleanor, while mine, no matter how hard I worked, were never acknowledged. I remember once in elementary school I won a statewide science award for a small solar energy project. I brought the certificate home, my heart leaping at the thought that maybe, just maybe, my father would smile. But Eleanor only glanced at it, then tossed the paper into the trash with a bitter remark. Don't delude yourself into thinking a worthless piece of paper can change your place. Vanessa simply stood there smirking, showing off the new shoes Eleanor had just bought her from Milan. That was my childhood, full of invisible cuts. I slowly learned to retreat inward, finding small pockets of joy where I could, reading in the abandoned library behind the mansion, sketching on old scraps of paper, and sometimes imagining another life where I wasn't considered the extra. But whenever I returned to reality, Eleanor's cold stare, Vanessa's mocking laugh, and my father's heavy silence reminded me that dream was nothing but a fantasy. By the time I emerged from that shadowed childhood, I knew the only way to survive was to rely on myself. No one in the Carter family gave me a single coin or a helping hand. Everything I would later achieve began with scholarships I earned through relentless effort. I still remember the moment I received my college acceptance letter with a full scholarship. My hands shook as I realized this was my ticket out of that mansion, away from Eleanor's contempt and Vanessa's sneers. On the day I left, no one came to see me off. Eleanor even announced in front of guests, "Finally, that burden has left my house." The words cut like a final knife, but at the same time, they became the very fuel for the vow I made to myself. I would never return in a position of weakness. My college years were a relentless stretch of studying and working without pause. I took shifts at a coffee shop, at the library, and squeezed in small interior design projects for friends to earn extra money. I discovered that I had an instinct for seeing space differently, creating harmony between light, color, and objects. That became the starting point for the path I would later choose. After graduation, I scraped together every dollar, borrowed a little more from a research grant, and rented a tiny room in Brooklyn to start my own interior design company. Back then, the company was just me, an old desk, and a laptop that had seen too many years. But to me, it was everything: a dream of owning my life, free from the Carter family's money or pity. While I was busy with small contracts designing studio apartments, coffee shops, or classrooms for elementary schools on the other side of the world, Vanessa and Eleanor were gracing the covers of society magazines. They were the center of glittering Manhattan parties, where diamond-studded gowns shimmered under chandelier light and expensive French wine glasses clinked in the laughter of the elite. Vanessa was regularly hailed by the press as the perfect heiress, while Eleanor was the powerful advisor behind Carter Industries. They strode confidently through charity galas, posed for photos with top politicians, and shook hands with banking moguls, real estate tycoons, even government officials. Every time I stumbled across their images in newspapers or on television, a strange ache pulsed in my chest, both painful and cold. Once, I had dreamed of being part of that picture. But eventually I realized that world was never meant for me. Richard, my father, was still alive, but the distance between us had never closed. He remained the boss on paper, his name stamped on every major contract, every business headline. But I knew all too well that the true hand steering Carter Industries was not his, but Eleanor's. I once attended a conference as a student and overheard a few businessmen speaking of her with an odd mix of respect and fear. "Eleanor Blackwood is the one really in charge." Richard is just the face. I was 19 at the time, sitting in the back row, and those words carved themselves into my memory. They confirmed what I had felt throughout my childhood. Eleanor was not just the mistress of the house, she was the strategist behind every move of the Carter empire. And me, though I shared the same blood, I remained an outsider. Richard never once called to ask how I was living in New York. Whenever I dared to send a letter sharing small victories like my company completing its first project or being featured in an independent design magazine, he stayed silent. No reply, no sign he even cared. Meanwhile, every step Vanessa took was celebrated, spotlighted, and praised. He proudly stood beside her at events, publicly presenting her as the heir. As for me, he seemed to deliberately keep his distance, as if my very existence were a risk that could unravel everything. New York City was a different kind of battlefield for me. There were no spotlights, no powerful handshakes, only small contracts and the grind of daily effort. I still remember the first evening I signed a contract on my own to renovate a one-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn. The owners were a young couple, and all they wanted was a space that felt neat and warm. I poured my whole heart into every detail, from the choice of paint colors and lighting to the placement of the furniture. When they looked around the finished apartment, the brightness in their eyes gave me a joy no paycheck could ever buy. That was the moment I realized that the path I had chosen, though modest, carried true meaning. But every night, when I returned to my tiny apartment and glanced at my phone screen lit up with images of Vanessa beaming on a new yacht or Eleanor raising a glass with top political figures, I felt the contrast more sharply than ever. Two worlds coexisted, separate, and I was standing at the edge, looking in. On one side was an empire of dazzling wealth and power. On the other, a young woman struggling to lay each brick for her own dream. And deep inside, I could never stop asking myself, why was I excluded? Why, with the same bloodline, was one exalted while the other was buried? That question never had an answer until the night I opened that dusty envelope and touched the truth. The news of my father's death reached me on a bleak autumn morning. I had just stepped out of my small office in Brooklyn when a call came from an unknown number. A rough male voice said, "Richard Carter, he's gone. The funeral will be this weekend." That was it. No words of condolence, no instructions, nothing more. I froze on the sidewalk, yellow leaves scattering around my feet. Though Richard had never truly been a father to me in all those years, the sudden news of his passing from a stroke still struck me with disbelief. Inside me there were no tears, only a heavy emptiness, as if a door had closed forever, one I had never been allowed to walk through. On the day of the funeral, I drove my old Honda, the only thing I had managed to own after years of labor, from New York back to Newport. The battered car looked small and out of place on the paved road leading to the Carter mansion, lined with sleek black limousines, Italian sports cars, and luxury SUVs. When I opened the door and stepped out, the rumble of engines and the click of high heels against marble blended together into a symphony of opulence that had never included me. I spotted Vanessa and Eleanor instantly as they descended from the newest Rolls-Royce, surrounded by a throng of people. Cameras flashed, guests crowded to shake their hands, their voices overflowing with flattery. So well-deserved, the true future of the Carter empire. Eleanor smiled with cold pride, while Vanessa, in a custom black dress, merely nodded as though such adoration were her birthright. I walked into the church where the service was being held and took a seat in the very last row. I didn't dare move forward, knowing full well I wasn't welcome. Throughout the ceremony, Richard was remembered as a brilliant leader, a devoted father, a great businessman. Not a single word was said about me. In their eyes, the Carter family consisted only of Eleanor and Vanessa. When Eleanor's gaze briefly swept over me, I caught that familiar glint of disdain. She didn't need to speak, her eyes alone mocked me. "How dare you even show your face here?" After the funeral, the guests were invited back to the Newport mansion for the reading of the will. The estate, perched on the Rhode Island coastline, loomed like a castle, its towering white marble columns and ivy-covered walls both majestic and unwelcoming. I had spent part of my childhood there, Yet every return made me feel like an intruder trespassing on forbidden ground. In the vast grand hall, portraits of Carter ancestors hung in solemn rows, but there was not a single trace of me or my mother. Eleanor sat regally at the center, Vanessa beside her, while I was given a small chair at the edge, an observer, nothing more. Mr. Finch, the middle-aged lawyer with a stern, weary look, stood to read the will. His voice echoed through the chamber. The entirety of Richard Carter's tangible and intangible assets, including estates, yachts, company shares, and properties totaling $18 million, shall be transferred to his daughter, Vanessa Carter. Applause and murmurs of approval spread across the room. Vanessa smiled in satisfaction, lifting her chin like a queen ascending her throne. Eleanor rested a hand on her daughter's shoulder, her eyes glittering with pride and triumph. I sat in silence, my heart pounding so hard it was difficult to breathe. $18 million, a figure beyond anything I could imagine, yet it didn't surprise me. I had expected this outcome, because all my life I had never truly been considered part of the family. But Finch wasn't finished. He turned another page, then paused, his voice lowering. In addition, Richard Carter left a message. The entire room went quiet. Finch read slowly, each word deliberate. Blood defines lineage, but character defines worth. You will receive exactly what you deserve. I felt dozens of eyes fall on me. Finch stepped forward and placed an old envelope into my hands, its edges yellowed as if it had been locked away for years. My fingers trembled as I took it, while a ripple of chuckles spread through the room. Vanessa burst into open laughter. Oh God, a dusty envelope. Isabel, do you really think Father left you anything? It's probably just an old Christmas card. The guests around her broke into laughter as well, some covering their mouths, though their eyes betrayed their ridicule. Eleanor didn't laugh as loudly as her daughter, but she leaned toward me, whispering with venom only I could hear. Exactly where you belong, nothing but dust. I bit down hard on my lip, my hand clutching the envelope so tightly the paper crumpled at the edges. I wanted to fight back, to shout that they could not keep me cast aside forever, but my throat locked. In that grand hall, surrounded by glittering gowns and expensive suits, I was nothing more than a small shadow, humiliated in front of dozens of witnesses. When the reading of the will ended, Vanessa was surrounded by people congratulating her as if she had just been crowned. I quietly rose, clutching the envelope to my chest, and left the mansion. As I passed through the grand doors, the ocean wind lashed against my face, cold and sharp, yet it couldn't cool the fire of humiliation burning in my chest. I walked past the rows of gleaming luxury cars until I reached my old Honda. The door creaked as I opened it, but at least it was the one space no one could take from me. I sat behind the wheel, my hands trembling, my mind in chaos. My entire life had been a lesson in exclusion, but never had I been publicly humiliated like this. I turned the key. The weak sputter of the engine rose like a bitter reminder of the distance between me and that other world. I arrived back in Brooklyn late at night. The small street where I lived was so quiet I could hear the wind slipping through the window cracks and a cat meowing faintly from the roof across the way. I sat down on the rickety wooden chair at my kitchen table, the yellow light casting blotched shadows on the walls. In my hands was still the old envelope, the thing everyone had mocked, dismissed as a cruel joke during the will reading. I turned it over under the lamp, feeling as if I were holding a secret no one cared to notice but me. I drew a long breath and gently opened the envelope. Inside was not an old Christmas card, nor some meaningless scrap of paper. There was only a thin sheet typed in terse lines, Zurich Liberty Bank. Account number 764291XXXX. This is for the child who was never supposed to exist. Your mother knew why. I read the words again and again, my head spinning. The child who was never supposed to exist, the phrase stabbed straight into my heart. All these years I had grown used to being overlooked, treated as an afterthought, but never had I seen the truth laid out in black and white like this. And, your mother knew why. Why would my father write that? Why bring up my mother, gone since I was 3, as if she held all the answers? My hands shook as I opened my old laptop. I typed the bank's name into the browser, and Zurich Liberty Bank appeared with its sleek, cold interface. I entered the account number, along with a small password printed at the bottom of the paper. My heart pounded wildly, each beat threatening to explode in my chest. The screen spun for a few seconds, then the number appeared. I froze, unable to believe my eyes. $127 million. $127 million. I sank back into my chair, breath coming fast and uneven. For a moment, the entire little apartment seemed to tilt around me. I looked around the room, the peeling walls, the old refrigerator rattling in the corner, the secondhand table and chairs from a thrift shop, and then back at the glaring number on the screen. The contrast was so stark I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Part of me wanted to scream, to call someone and share it, but then I realized I had no one. No family member, no close friend near enough for me to tell that I had just discovered a fortune beyond imagination. It was only me, sitting in my small apartment, holding the biggest secret of my life. And, at the same time, a massive question rose inside me. Why had my father left this money to me? And why not to Vanessa, the daughter the whole world assumed to be the rightful heir? If Richard had only wanted me to stay silent, he could have ignored me as he always had. If he wanted to punish Eleanor, he had an entire will to do it publicly. So why this hidden way, leaving me only an old envelope with that haunting message? I wondered if this was just another cruel trick from Eleanor. But no, the typewritten words were too precise, the tone far too personal. This was undoubtedly from Richard. And that sum couldn't be fake. I tried transferring a small amount, exactly $500, into my own personal account. Within seconds, the balance appeared in my US bank, proof that the Zurich account was real. I sat frozen, my hands clutching my head. $127 million. It wasn't a gift. It was a burden, a vast mystery laced with a responsibility I wasn't yet ready to carry. I thought of the message again. Your mother knew why. My mother, Laura Miller, the woman whose memory in my mind lived only in faint scraps, a light trace of perfume, the soft hum of a lullaby, her arms holding me on cold nights. Everything ended when her car plunged down a hill in the accident the Carter family never spoke of again. Now I couldn't stop myself from thinking, was that death tied to this money? And why had my father mentioned my mother when leaving me this secret fortune? I opened a desk drawer and took out an old album I'd kept. Inside were only a handful of photographs of her, one where she held me in the park, one where she stood at the door of our old house in Boston. I ran my fingers over her face in the picture and whispered, "Mom, I have to find out the truth. I need to know why Father did this, and why you're the key to all of it." Outside, car horns echoed through the night, and the streetlights cast a dull golden glow across the room. I sat alone, caught between two realities. One Isabel, poor and publicly humiliated at the will reading, and another Isabel who had just discovered she held a fortune capable of changing everything. Between those two versions of myself, the only thread connecting them was the relentless question, why had my father chosen me? That night I hardly slept. The figure $127 million flashed in my mind like a light that refused to go out. But more haunting than the number was the message. Your mother knew why. If my mother knew the reason, then everything had to begin with her death. I decided I would go back, search for every trace left behind from the accident that had taken her life when I was only 3 years old. The next morning, I called in to take the day off, pulled on an old coat, and boarded a train to Boston, the place where the accident records were kept. On the way, my heart pounded as if I were stepping into a play whose script had already been written, except I had not yet reached the final act. The administrative building where homicide and accident files were stored was old, the air heavy with the smell of aged paper mixed with rusted metal. I filled out the request form, my hand trembling as I wrote the name. Laura Miller, 1999. The clerk looked at me with a measuring stare before disappearing into the archives. Half an hour later, she returned and laid a thin but weighty file onto the desk. I opened it, the yellowed pages revealing the words, Case No. 11478, Vehicle Accident. The detailed report stated that my mother's car had plunged down a hill on the outskirts, the brakes having completely failed. But what froze me to the core was a red underlined note. Brake line appeared intentionally severed. Further investigation recommended. Potential homicide. I sat paralyzed, my eyes locked on the words. So, from the very beginning, the police had suspected this was no accident. They had been prepared to pursue it as a homicide case, but at the end of the file was a short memorandum. Investigation closed per request of Richard Carter. Cause of death officially listed as accident. I read that line again and again, my mind in turmoil. My father, Richard, the man who had abandoned me my entire life, he was the one who asked for the investigation to be shut down. Why? What was he afraid of? Who was he protecting? I leaned back in the chair and closed my eyes, childhood memories flooding in. I remembered once, as a little girl, I had overheard Eleanor furiously arguing with Richard in the living room. Her voice was sharp, cutting. She must never set foot in this house. Laura is nothing but a stain you foolishly brought into our lives. I will not let her take my place. Back then, I hadn't understood the meaning of those words, only the sight of Eleanor's face, flushed red, her eyes burning with hatred. Now, linking that fragment of memory to the file in my hands, I shuddered at the realization. Eleanor had every motive to want my mother gone. The more I thought, the more the pieces aligned in a terrifying way. Eleanor had always treated me as a burden, a living reminder that Richard had once loved another woman. She had never hidden her contempt for my mother. I remembered the rare family gatherings when, if someone happened to mention Laura's name, Eleanor would immediately change the subject or drop a cruel remark. What's worth saying about someone like that? I would sit in silence, but deep down, I knew she hated my mother more than anyone else ever could. I closed the file, my hands trembling with rage. All these years, my mother's death had not been fate but the result of a conspiracy. And the one who requested the case be closed, my father, was involved. Yet deep down, I felt Richard was not the culprit. He might have stayed silent out of fear, pressure, or because of a force far greater than I had ever imagined. And when I recalled Eleanor's eyes at the funeral, that triumphant gleam as if she still held everything in her grasp, a chill ran down my spine. On the train ride back to New York, I stared out at the rushing scenery, a fierce determination rising inside me. I needed to dig deeper, to uncover why Eleanor wielded such immense power. Power strong enough to force Richard into shutting down a murder case. Since childhood, I had sensed that Eleanor was not merely the wealthy wife behind Richard. She had a way of making people obey, from household staff to Carter Industries business partners. Richard might have been the boss on paper, but I believed the true power had always rested with Eleanor. When I arrived at my apartment, I set the file on the table and stared at the red underlined words. Brake line severed. The picture was becoming clear. My mother had been murdered. Richard knew, but chose to conceal it. Eleanor had the motive, the influence, and for years had openly despised my mother. Inside me, a voice grew louder. Eleanor Blackwood knew more than she had ever admitted. She was the key. And if I wanted to uncover the truth, I would have to start by exposing the real woman behind Eleanor, the one who had destroyed my childhood and stolen my mother from me. My phone rang on a gray Monday morning. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar international number, beginning with the code +41. I hesitated for a moment, then answered. On the other end was a deep male voice, precise, with a faint German inflection. Hello, this is Hinrich Ducker, Senior Manager at Zurich Liberty Bank. I need to speak with you, Isabel Carter. At the mention of the bank's name, my heart nearly stopped. That was the very place holding the secret $127 million I had just discovered. I replied softly, trying to keep my composure. Yes, this is me, but how do you know who I am? And how did you get my number? The man paused briefly, then said, Miss Carter, I was entrusted by Mr. Richard Carter. Before his death, he left instructions that once you accessed the account, we were to contact you immediately. There are things he wanted you to know, but could not say while he was alive. His voice carried no hint of deception. I sat upright, my entire body going cold. Ducker suggested we continue through a secure video channel. Within minutes, my laptop screen displayed the image of a man in his 60s, silver-haired but with sharp, unwavering eyes. He inclined his head in greeting before beginning to speak. Isabel, you have probably always wondered why you lived on the margins of the Carter family. The truth is, your mother, Laura Miller, was not just an ordinary woman. She was once an undercover FBI agent, embedded to investigate illegal operations within Carter Industries. I was stunned. All my life, I had only known my mother through hazy memories and a handful of old photographs, a gentle woman with kind blue eyes. I had never imagined she had once been an agent. No, that can't be, I whispered. But Ducker went on. This is a classified file the FBI kept sealed for years. Under Richard's leadership, Carter Industries became entangled in money laundering networks and clandestine finance. Laura was assigned to infiltrate, to get close to Richard and gather evidence. But everything changed when she truly fell in love with him, and then became pregnant with you. End quote. I clutched my head, my heart pounding wildly. Everything was spinning. My mother, an FBI agent? And me the result of a mission gone off plan? Ducker nodded, as if he could feel the shock I was going through. When she discovered she was pregnant, Laura chose to withdraw from the mission. She didn't want her child born into a storm. But at that very moment, her enemies found out. He paused, eyes fixed on the camera. The order to eliminate her did not come from Richard, but from Eleanor Blackwood. The name Eleanor landed like a hammer blow to my chest. I stopped breathing, my palms icy. Ducker continued. Eleanor was not merely Richard's wife. She was the covert leader, the one running the dark financial network behind Carter Industries. Richard was only the legal facade. Eleanor learned Laura was an agent, and when Laura tried to leave, she saw her as a threat. The order was given, remove her. And the accident in 1999 was the result. I listened as if slipping into another realm. All the fragments I had once suspected now clicked perfectly into place: the file about the severed brake line, the memories of Eleanor's jealousy, my father's fearful silence. Everything led to one point. Eleanor. Not just a cruel stepmother, but the woman who had destroyed my mother's life and hidden the truth for decades. And what about Vanessa? I asked, my voice trembling. Ducker's expression grew solemn. Vanessa is Eleanor's biological daughter. She was raised to be the legitimate heir, a shield to maintain Eleanor's grip on power. But in truth, Eleanor is the one pulling the strings. Vanessa is only a pawn, unaware of the full extent of her mother's crimes. I sat in silence as tears streamed down my face. For so many years I had blamed Richard for his coldness, for abandoning me. Now I understood he had lived under constant fear. He knew the truth about Eleanor, knew she had killed Laura, but if he dared to defy her, my life would have been in danger. Perhaps that was why he kept his distance, to protect me from the gaze of the murderer disguised as a high society lady. Ducker sent over another digital file. Records, financial documents, and photographs linking Eleanor directly to global money laundering operations. Richard secretly transferred these to me. He wanted you, when you were strong enough, to learn the truth and choose your own path. The $127 million are not tainted funds. They're a trust Laura and Richard created to protect you, to give you freedom, even while Eleanor controlled everything else. I stared at the screen in shock. My world had turned upside down. Grief and fury surged through me all at once. Eleanor Blackwood, the woman who had stolen my mother, destroyed my childhood, and built a sanctified facade around the Carter empire, was now revealed as the mastermind of crime. The call ended, but I remained frozen before the dark screen. My breath came in sharp bursts, my heart hammering with each beat. I knew that from this moment on, there was no way back. I was holding in my hands the key to unlock the darkest secrets of all. And I swore to myself I would not allow my mother's death to be buried one more day. I had thought I would hate Richard Carter forever, the father who only watched from a distance, letting me grow up in loneliness and humiliation. But after the call from Zurich, the layers of the veil began to lift. I realized the distance he built between us was not entirely indifference or contempt, but a wall of protection he had been forced to erect to shield me from Eleanor's darkness. I returned to the file Ducker had sent, reading and rereading every page. There were internal FBI memos, anonymous letters sent from untraceable addresses, all bearing the same electronic signature matching Richard's. In them, he provided information about suspicious Carter Industries transactions, vast sums funneled into tax havens. He never appeared as the whistleblower himself, but the repeated phrase, internal source, said everything. Richard was both the man steering the empire and the secret betrayer in the shadows, living with two faces every day. I reeled back into memories of my childhood. The long dinners where he sat at the head of the table, rigid, eyes always avoiding mine. I had once believed that look held shame, that I was the illegitimate child. But now I understood. Perhaps every time he looked at me, he feared Eleanor would notice some flicker of affection he still held for me. He chose silence and coldness because if he showed closeness, Eleanor would immediately suspect. In that ruthless game of power, I had unknowingly become his most dangerous vulnerability. Ducker's files also mentioned a special fund, one that began in 1998, right after Laura became pregnant with me. The first transfers came from an unknown source, but after that Richard added to it steadily. The cold numbers in the account ledger suddenly felt heavy. They weren't just figures, they were evidence of a father's fear and determination. He had known Eleanor could strike at any time, and that money was the only insurance for my survival. I trembled as memories returned of being left alone in the maid's room, of eating with the staff in the kitchen while Vanessa shone at the dining table. Back then, all I had felt was shame and pain. But now I understood every distance, every invisibility he imposed on me had been a layer of disguise. Eleanor would never allow anyone to threaten her position or her daughters. If I had been publicly acknowledged, if Richard had openly protected me, perhaps I would not be alive to tell this story now. But the truth did not erase the ache. I still felt a knot in my throat when I remembered the years I had begged silently for a hug, a word of praise, and received only a cold, distant glance. I whispered to myself, "Father, why didn't you believe I was strong enough to know the truth? Why did you let me endure it all alone?" The question drifted into the night, unanswered, leaving only the sound of wind slipping through the window of my small apartment. Among the papers lay one final note, Richard's signature clear at the bottom. "If my daughter finds this, tell her that I have always seen Laura in her." I kept my distance not because I did not love her, but because I loved her too much. Eleanor would never spare her if she knew I still cared. The only way to protect her was to let her believe she was only a shadow. I read those lines over and over until tears blurred the ink. All those years of hatred, all those years wondering if I was worth anything, everything boiled down to one bitter truth. He loved me, but that love had been chained by fear of Eleanor. Looking back, I saw Richard like a bird trapped in a gilded cage, brilliant on the outside, but full of invisible wounds within. He had lived his whole life compromising, maintaining enough power to avoid being cast aside, while secretly feeding fragments of evidence to the FBI, hoping one day the truth would emerge. But he had not been brave enough to break the chains himself. All he could do was leave it for me, the child he had once deliberately pushed out of the light, but to whom he had secretly entrusted the future of the truth. I sat alone in my cramped Brooklyn apartment, the thick FBI files spread before me, the laptop screen still glowing with the figure $127 million. Never in my life had I felt so starkly caught between two worlds. On one side, that vast sum promised a life I had never dared dream of. A seaside mansion, trips around the world, doors opening with a single click. On the other side, pages steeped in blood, Ducker's voice echoing in my mind. Laura Miller was murdered on the orders of Eleanor Blackwood. And I knew my mother, the gentle woman I remembered only through a few faded images, deserved more than any fortune ever could. Vanessa's image filled my mind, her elegant black dress at the funeral, her self-satisfied smile as she accepted an empire worth $18 million. I had once envied her, once hated her because I was never allowed to stand in the light. But now, with the truth revealed, I no longer saw a perfect sister. I saw a puppet. Vanessa was nothing more than a flower Eleanor had placed on the altar of power, a cover to hide the bloodstained lineage and the hands that had killed my mother. That empire was not an inheritance, it was evidence of a crime. And if I chose silence, I would be helping Eleanor keep her grip on everything. Two paths appeared before me. The first, I could stay silent, keep the 127 million, disappear from Eleanor's sight, and live a comfortable life anywhere in the world. Switzerland, Italy, even a small house on the California coast. No one would know, no one would bother me. I could start over, leave the past behind. The second, I could step into the light, reveal the entire truth, hand the files to the FBI, and force Eleanor and even Vanessa to face justice. But that path meant putting myself in danger. Eleanor was not someone who sat still. She had money, connections, and an entire criminal network behind her. I asked myself, which path would my mother want me to choose? If she were alive, would Laura want me safe, or would she want me to finish the mission she never could? I opened the only photo I still had of her standing in front of our old Boston house, holding me as a little girl. Her eyes stared straight into the lens, gentle yet unyielding. I knew the answer was there, in that gaze. My mother had been an FBI agent. She had chosen to sacrifice herself to protect the truth. I was her daughter. I could not betray that ideal out of fear. I remembered the final words of the will Finch had read aloud. Blood defines lineage, but character defines worth. You will receive exactly what you deserve. At the time, I had thought it was nothing more than a bitter, cutting phrase. But now I understood. Richard knew I would have a choice, and what I deserved was not to live quietly off money, but to face the truth and decide with my own character. I stood up and began pacing the small room. Fear crept in. If I failed, Eleanor could have me eliminated the way she had my mother. But at the same time, a fire flared inside me. I had spent my whole life in the shadows, branded the child nobody wanted, mocked and discarded. This was the first time I had the chance to turn the board, and I swore I would not waste it. I reopened my laptop and typed an encrypted email to Ducker. I choose justice. Tell me the next step. My fingers trembled as I hit send, but immediately afterward a strange calm washed over me. I knew this path would be full of danger, but at least I was no longer the invisible child in the maid's room. I was Isabel Carter, daughter of Laura Miller. And I would not let my mother's death remain buried another day. I closed the laptop and stepped out onto the balcony. The New York night lay beneath me, neon lights glowing, traffic humming, the scent of gasoline carried in the wind. I drew a deep breath. For the first time in years, I felt my body trembling, not from fear, but from strength rising inside me. From this moment on, my life would no longer be dictated by Eleanor or Vanessa. The choice was mine, and I had chosen justice. From the moment I sent the email to Ducker, I knew I had stepped onto a road with no way back. In the days that followed, I lived strung tight as a wire. I locked every door, checked the security cameras multiple times, and always carried a can of pepper spray in my bag. But fear no longer paralyzed me the way it once had. It had become fuel, a reminder that I was moving closer to the truth Eleanor had tried to bury for more than 2 decades. The first thing I did was separate a portion of the assets from Eleanor's shadow. That night I logged into the Zurich account, my hand shaking as I entered the amount, $10 million. I transferred it into a private account in my name at a U.S. bank, an account Ducker had securely set up. When the transaction completed, I let out a breath. That was my safety net. If everything collapsed, at least I had a future to hold on to. But the remaining sum, 117 million, I left untouched. It was not for me. It was evidence, my mother's legacy, the blade I was about to drive straight into the heart of the empire Eleanor had built. I spent the entire week organizing the documents Ducker had sent. Hundreds of pages of financial reports, transaction invoices, internal memoranda, and scattered testimonies from anonymous sources. I numbered everything, arranged it, and finally compressed it into an encrypted digital dossier. I knew I could not defeat Eleanor alone. She had a network, and I was just one person. So I sent the entire file to a confidential FBI address Ducker provided. In the email I wrote briefly, "My name is Isabel Carter. This is evidence of illegal financial activity by Carter Industries under the direction of Eleanor Blackwood. I request protection and, above all, I request justice for Laura Miller." 2 days later, the FBI made contact. One morning, while I sat in my usual Brooklyn cafe, 2 men in suits approached my table. They didn't need to show me a badge. I knew immediately where they were from. One of them spoke quietly, "We received the file. You did the right thing." Those words left me trembling and strangely relieved. After so many years, someone was finally on my side. The operation unfolded faster than I ever imagined. Perhaps it was because the FBI had already been quietly monitoring Carter Industries for years, and what I provided was simply the final piece that completed the puzzle. I wasn't told the details, but from the scattered hints, I understood that the net had already been cast wide. And then, the fateful morning arrived. The news exploded like a bomb. I sat frozen in front of the television, watching live images from Rhode Island. Dozens of FBI agents stormed the Newport mansion, black SUVs blocking every entrance. Eleanor, dressed in a silk sapphire gown, still tried to hold her haughty composure, but her wrists were bound in gleaming handcuffs. Vanessa screamed hysterically, her face twisted in fear, as she was dragged out the front gates under the flashing cameras of dozens of reporters. The anchor's voice rang out, "The FBI has just dismantled a large-scale illegal financial network tied to Carter Industries. This is considered the biggest organized crime case in years." My throat tightened. All my life I had dreamed of this moment, the moment Eleanor would bow her head, the moment Vanessa's arrogance would finally crumble. Yet, when it truly happened, I didn't feel wild triumph. Instead, a deep sadness washed over me. Because behind the flashing cameras, behind the shouting and the click of handcuffs, I saw the shadow of my mother, the woman who had died in silence so that justice could finally be named today. The news spread across every headline. Carter Empire collapses, high society queen exposed as criminal mastermind. Arrest shakes business elite. Articles detailed how the FBI froze all assets, the Newport mansion, the luxury yachts, the collection of supercars all seized. Even the $18 million Vanessa had inherited from the will was immediately frozen. The glamorous images of Eleanor and Vanessa, once seated in the front row of galas, were now replaced by photographs of them in orange prison jumpsuits, handcuffed, heads bowed before the court. I sat alone in my apartment, watching the broadcast, my breath coming fast and shallow. I had done what my father had never dared to do. I had dragged Eleanor into the light, shattered the flawless mask she had worn to rule over everything. But at what cost? I knew that somewhere out there, those still loyal to her might be seething, might be plotting revenge. I had no illusion that the danger was over. Yet, for the first time in my life, I felt my mother was no longer forgotten. After everything, I left New York on a quiet winter night. The glowing streets, the familiar car horns, I knew I would miss them, but I also understood they were bound to shadows and painful memories. I needed a new beginning, a place where I could breathe freely without being haunted by the name Carter. And so, I chose Switzerland, the land my mother had once dreamed of, where still waters reflected snow-capped mountains, where my parents' secret had once been safeguarded inside a bank account. Life began, simply. I rented a small apartment overlooking Lake Geneva. By day, I worked alongside young local architects, taking on modest interior design projects. By night, I walked along the lake, letting the cold wind sting my face and remind me that I was still alive, still free to choose how I lived. But I refused to let my life be only for myself. From the weight of loss, I understood the pain of children robbed of their parents by crime. I decided to create a foundation, named the Laura Foundation, in my mother's memory. It would support children who had lost parents to violence, scholarships, safe housing, and above all, arms ready to hold them, the very thing I had once longed for but never received. I used part of the profits from my work and my private investments to run the Laura Foundation. But I never touched the $127 million, even though it remained in the Zurich account. As the years passed, the number grew steadily with interest and safe investments managed by Ducker. One day, I looked at the screen and saw it had surpassed 200 million USD. I laughed a sound both relieved and bitter. I had never needed that money to prove my worth. I only needed to know it existed as proof that my parents, in their own way, had tried to protect me even when they were gone. Each year, like a ritual, Hinrich Ducker would call. His face grew older, but his eyes remained sharp. "Miss Isabel," he asked, "do you want to claim the entire sum now? It is yours, legally, and every restriction has expired." I smiled and shook my head. "I already have enough, Mr. Ducker. I have a home, a job I love, and a foundation that carries my mother's name. That's all I need." He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded, as if he understood that my real strength was not in the number on the bank screen, but in my ability to choose not to be ruled by it. From time to time, the media still mentioned the fall of Carter Industries as a landmark in the fight against financial crime. My name rarely appeared, and I wanted it that way. I didn't need glory, I only wanted quiet peace. Eleanor Blackwood and Vanessa had become names tied forever to disgrace, imprisoned, their wealth stripped away. But I chose a different path, not more revenge, but healing. I would never forget that my mother had fallen for the truth, and I knew the best way to honor her was not to live in hatred, but to use freedom to create meaning. One summer afternoon, I sat by the lakeshore with a group of children from the Laura Foundation, listening to their laughter as they played tag. A little blonde girl, no more than 7, suddenly hugged me tightly and whispered, "Thank you for giving me a family." I was choked with emotion as I held her close. In that moment, I realized the greatest inheritance was not the money my parents left behind, but the ability to turn my pain into light for others. And so, my story closes with a simple truth that took me a lifetime to learn. The real inheritance is not the wealth parents leave behind, but the freedom to choose how you live. I am no longer the child nobody wanted. I am no longer invisible. I am Isabel Carter, the daughter of Laura Miller, and I have rewritten my own destiny. The final scene I want to keep in my memory. A quiet evening by Lake Geneva. The sky fades into a soft violet, the breeze rippling gently across the water. I walk along the shore, letting the chill brush through my hair, and whisper, "Mom, I did it. And I am free."
My fiancé cheated on me with my own mother just days before our wedding, but what I did shocked everyone. My name is Rebecca, and I'm 28 years old. Right now, I'm standing at the altar of St. Mary's Cathedral, wearing the most beautiful wedding dress I've ever seen, surrounded by 200 guests who have no idea what's about to happen. The white silk feels heavy against my skin, and the cathedral's stained glass windows cast colorful shadows across the marble floor. My bouquet of white roses trembles slightly in my hands, but not from nerves about marriage. I'm trembling because in exactly 24 hours, my entire world crumbled into pieces. My father stands beside me, his arm linked with mine, his face stern but supportive. He knows what I know now. He's the only one who does. In the front row, my mother sits perfectly composed in her navy blue dress, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief as if she's the picture of a proud mother. Next to me, my fiancé adjusts his tie nervously, flashing that charming smile that once made my heart skip beats. Now it makes my stomach turn. The organ music fills the cathedral as guests whisper among themselves, admiring the decorations my mother insisted on choosing. White lilies everywhere, exactly as she wanted. The same flowers she mentioned loving in her diary entries about him. About them. Together. I graduated summa cum laude with a degree in English literature from Columbia University. I work as a senior editor at Morrison & Associates Publishing, one of the most prestigious publishing houses in Manhattan. I've built a life I'm proud of, a career that matters, relationships I treasure, or at least I thought I had. My father is Pastor Williams, respected throughout our community for his integrity and wisdom. Ironically, he raised me to value honesty above all else. My fiancé comes from the prominent Blackwell family. Old money, connections, the kind of background that looks perfect on paper and in wedding announcements. 3 years ago, when he proposed during intermission at Lincoln Center while we watched Swan Lake, I thought I was living a fairy tale. The spotlight hit the stage as he knelt with a 3-carat diamond ring, and everyone in our section turned to watch. It was magical, perfect, everything I'd dreamed of since I was a little girl. The wedding planning started immediately. My mother threw herself into every detail with an intensity that should have been my first warning. She insisted on choosing the venue, the flowers, the menu, even my dress. When I suggested alternatives, she'd get this look in her eyes, desperate, almost panicked, and say things like, "Sweetheart, trust me, I know what's best." I thought she was just being an overprotective mother living vicariously through my big day. Now I understand she was planning the wedding where she'd watch the man she was sleeping with marry her daughter. The pianist begins the processional, and I take my first step down the aisle. Each footstep echoes in the vast cathedral, and I can feel 200 pairs of eyes on me. Some guests smile and wave subtly. Others wipe away tears, thinking they're witnessing a beautiful love story. They have no idea they're about to witness something entirely different. My bouquet contains a small surprise tucked between the roses, a few pages from my mother's diary, the evidence that shattered my world yesterday afternoon. The pages where she detailed every intimate moment with my fiancé, every lie they told me, every plan they made to continue their affair after today. As I walk toward the altar, I'm not the naive girl who believed in perfect love and happy endings. I'm a woman who discovered that sometimes the people you trust most are capable of the deepest betrayals. And sometimes, the only way to reclaim your dignity is to refuse to be a victim of their lies. The wedding march continues, and with each step, I'm walking toward the moment when I'll show everyone exactly who I really am. 3 months ago, I thought I had everything figured out. I woke up every morning in my cozy apartment on the Upper West Side, walked to work at Morrison & Associates, where I edited manuscripts that would become bestsellers, and came home to plan the wedding of my dreams with the man I thought was my soulmate. My daily routine was predictable and comfortable. Coffee at 7, a quick scan of industry news, then the subway to my office where I spent hours immersed in stories about other people's lives. I specialized in contemporary fiction, particularly novels about relationships and family dynamics. The irony isn't lost on me now. I was an expert at spotting plot holes and character inconsistencies in fiction, but completely blind to them in my own life. My fiancé worked at Sterling Martinez & Associates, one of Manhattan's top law firms. He specialized in corporate mergers and acquisitions, pulling in a 6-figure salary that allowed us to plan the kind of wedding that gets featured in magazines. We'd been together for 3 years, living separately, but spending most nights together, talking about buying a house in Connecticut once we were married. The engagement had been everything I'd ever dreamed of. During Swan Lake's second intermission, he'd excused himself, supposedly to get champagne. Instead, the spotlight suddenly illuminated our box seats, and there he was, down on one knee with a ring that caught the theater lights like a small star. The entire audience turned to watch as I said yes, tears streaming down my face. Even now, despite everything, I remember how perfect that moment felt. My mother cried harder than I did that night. She hugged him so tightly I had to laugh and pull her away, joking about how she was acting like she was the one getting engaged. She insisted we celebrate at her favorite restaurant downtown, the one with the intimate candlelit tables and wine list she'd memorized. She ordered a bottle of wine that cost more than most people's rent, saying nothing was too good for her future son-in-law. The wedding planning consumed our lives for months. Every weekend meant appointments, dress fittings, cake tastings, venue tours, meetings with florists. My mother appointed herself as head coordinator, creating detailed spreadsheets and timelines that rivaled corporate project management systems. She had opinions about everything, from the shade of white for my dress to the specific variety of roses for my bouquet. When I suggested having the ceremony at my father's church instead of the expensive cathedral she'd chosen, she practically had a panic attack. "Sweetheart, the cathedral has such better acoustics for the music, and the architecture is so much more photogenic. This is your one special day." She had an answer for everything, always delivered with such conviction that I found myself agreeing just to keep the peace. My fiancé seemed oddly uninvolved for someone planning his own wedding. When I'd ask his opinion about table arrangements or menu choices, he'd shrug and say, "Whatever makes you and your mother happy." I thought he was being considerate, letting the women handle the traditionally feminine aspects of wedding planning. Now I realize he was letting my mother plan their fantasy wedding. Work became my refuge from the wedding chaos. At Morrison & Associates, I felt competent and valued. My boss frequently complimented my editorial instincts, and authors specifically requested me for their projects. I was building something that was entirely mine, separate from my identity as someone's daughter or future wife. But even at work, the wedding followed me. My mother would call daily with updates and questions. The florist needs to know if you prefer baby's breath or eucalyptus in the centerpieces. The caterer is asking about dietary restrictions for your fiancé's extended family. Always urgent. Always needing immediate decisions. Looking back, I should have questioned why my mother knew so much about my fiancé's family's preferences, why she seemed to have his cousin's phone number memorized, why she always knew exactly which wine he preferred when we went out to dinner together. The first time I noticed something strange, I dismissed it as wedding stress affecting my judgment. It was a Thursday evening in early spring, about 2 months before the wedding. I'd stopped by my mother's house to drop off the final guest count for the caterer, and I found my fiancé's car parked in her driveway. When I walked into the kitchen, they were standing closer than seemed necessary, both holding glasses of wine and laughing at some private joke. My mother's cheeks were flushed, and she had that sparkle in her eyes that I hadn't seen since before my parents' marriage started deteriorating years ago. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, stepping back quickly from him. "We were just going over the seating chart. Your fiancé had such wonderful suggestions about where to place his business associates." He smiled that charming smile and kissed my cheek. "Your mother has incredible attention to detail. I was just telling her how lucky you are to have someone so invested in making your day perfect." They seemed to have an entire conversation with their eyes before my mother bustled over to the refrigerator. "Let me get you some wine, honey. We got this beautiful bottle from that vineyard upstate. Your fiancé picked it out. He said it's exactly what you'd love." The wine was perfect. It was from a small vineyard I'd mentioned loving during a weekend trip we'd taken 6 months earlier. But I'd never told my mother about that vineyard. I'd barely remembered mentioning it myself. "How did you know about that place?" I asked him. He exchanged another look with my mother before answering. "You mentioned it, remember? Last month when we were talking about honeymoon destinations?" I didn't remember that conversation, but wedding planning had become such a blur that I figured I must have forgotten. That was my first mistake, choosing to trust instead of questioning. The incidents became more frequent as the wedding approached. I'd call my mother and hear masculine laughter in the background before she'd quickly explain that my father was watching something funny on television. But my father was usually at the church during those times, preparing sermons or meeting with parishioners. One Saturday afternoon, I arrived at my mother's house unexpectedly to borrow her good serving dishes for a dinner party. I found her in the living room, disheveled in a way I'd never seen before. Her hair was messed, her lipstick was smudged, and she was wearing a silk robe at 3 in the afternoon. "Rebecca, I wasn't expecting you," she said, pulling the robe tighter around herself. "I called 20 minutes ago," I replied, confused. "You said to come over." "Did I?" "Oh yes, of course, I was just taking a nap. Wedding planning is so exhausting." But the coffee table held 2 wine glasses, both recently used, and I could smell expensive cologne in the air, not my father's usual aftershave. One of the glasses had a lipstick mark that matched my mother's shade perfectly. The other had no trace of lipstick at all. "Were you expecting company?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "No, sweetheart. Just me here, enjoying a quiet afternoon." She moved quickly to collect the glasses, but I noticed her hands were trembling slightly. I helped her gather the serving dishes, but something felt fundamentally wrong about the entire interaction. My mother was acting like someone hiding something, and I couldn't understand what she'd have to hide from me. 2 weeks later, I was having lunch with my fiancé at our favorite restaurant when his phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at it and smiled. Not the polite smile he used with clients or acquaintances, but the intimate smile I thought was reserved for me. "Work?" I asked. "Just your mother confirming tomorrow's appointment with the wedding photographer," he said, putting the phone face down on the table. But I'd spoken to the photographer that morning, and we'd moved the appointment to next week. When I mentioned this, he looked confused for a moment before recovering. "Oh, she must be talking about the backup photographer. You know how thorough she is about having contingency plans." We'd never discussed a backup photographer. 3 weeks before the wedding, I decided to surprise my mother with lunch. She'd been working so hard on wedding preparations, and I wanted to show my appreciation with her favorite takeout from the Greek place downtown. I used my key to let myself in, calling out as I entered, "Mom, I brought you lunch." No answer. I walked through the foyer toward the kitchen, but something felt different about the house. The air held a lingering scent of expensive cologne, and I noticed a men's suit jacket draped over the dining room chair. Not my father's style at all. It was charcoal gray, well-tailored, the kind my fiancé wore to important business meetings. I found my mother in the kitchen, frantically tidying up. Her hair was disheveled, her blouse was wrinkled, and she had that flushed, breathless look of someone who'd been caught off guard. "Rebecca, "What are you doing here?" She seemed almost panicked. "I brought lunch," I said slowly, taking in the scene. 2 coffee cups sat in the sink, still warm. 2 plates with crumbs from what looked like an intimate brunch. A bottle of wine was open on the counter, half empty, with 2 glasses nearby. "I thought you might be hungry," I continued, setting the takeout bag on the counter. "Were you expecting someone?" "No, sweetheart. Just me here." Her voice was too bright, too quick. "I was just cleaning up from breakfast. You know how I hate leaving dishes around." But the table was set for 2 with her good china, the delicate porcelain set she only used for special occasions. A single red rose lay across one of the placemats, clearly fresh, its petals still perfect. The morning newspaper was folded open to the arts section, something my mother never read but my fiancé always checked for reviews of shows he wanted to see. "Mom, whose jacket is that in the dining room?" I asked directly. She followed my gaze and paled slightly. "Oh, that's your father's. He must have left it there this morning before church." But my father was conducting a wedding rehearsal across town at that exact moment. I knew because I'd helped him prepare the ceremony notes the night before. And the jacket was clearly too modern, too expensive for my father's conservative taste and modest pastor's salary. "I should probably get going," my mother said quickly, moving toward the jacket. "I have an appointment with the florist in an hour, and you know how traffic gets downtown." She was lying. We'd confirmed the florist appointment for tomorrow, not today. I'd written it in my planner myself. I stayed for 20 minutes, watching my mother act increasingly nervous. She kept glancing at the clock, jumping slightly whenever a car passed outside, and making conversation that felt forced and unnatural. When I finally left, I noticed she immediately locked the door behind me, something she never did during the day. That evening, I mentioned the jacket to my father during dinner at their house. "Jacket?" he said, genuinely confused. "What jacket?" "The charcoal gray one in the dining room this afternoon," I explained. "Mom said it was yours." My parents exchanged a look I couldn't interpret. My mother quickly stood to clear dishes that were still full of food. "Oh, that jacket," my father said carefully. "I borrowed it from someone at the church for the wedding photos next week. I wanted to look more contemporary." But my father had never cared about looking contemporary in his life, and he was at least 40 pounds heavier than whoever owned that perfectly tailored jacket. Over the next few days, I found myself paying attention to details I'd previously ignored. The way my mother's face lit up whenever my fiancé called. How she always seemed to know his schedule better than I did. The fact that she'd started wearing different perfume. Something more expensive and sensual than her usual light floral scent. When I mentioned to my fiancé that my mother seemed stressed about wedding preparations, he was quick to offer help. "Maybe I should stop by and help her with some of the vendor calls," he suggested. "I know she's been working so hard, and I have more flexibility in my schedule this week." I thought it was sweet that he wanted to support my mother. I had no idea he was volunteering to spend more time alone with his lover. 1 week after finding the mysterious jacket, something shifted in my fiancé's behavior that I couldn't ignore. We'd been inseparable for 3 years, spending almost every evening together, sharing everything from work stress to silly inside jokes. Suddenly, he became distant and evasive in ways that felt completely foreign. It started on a Tuesday evening when I arrived at his apartment with takeout from our favorite Thai restaurant. I had my key, as always, and let myself in calling his name. Usually, he'd greet me with enthusiasm, asking about my day and helping me set up dinner. Instead, I found him on the phone in his bedroom with the door closed, speaking in hushed tones. When he finally emerged 20 minutes later, he seemed startled to see me. "How long have you been here?" he asked. "About 20 minutes. I brought dinner." I gestured toward the containers I'd arranged on his dining table. "Oh, I'm not really hungry tonight. I think I'm coming down with something." He did look flushed, but not in a sick way. More like someone who'd been caught in an uncomfortable situation. I moved closer to feel his forehead, the way I had dozens of times during our relationship when he wasn't feeling well. He stepped back before I could touch him. "I don't want to get you sick," he said quickly. "Maybe you should go home tonight." In 3 years together, he'd never asked me to leave when he was feeling unwell. Usually, he wanted me to stay and take care of him. I offered to make tea or run to the pharmacy for medicine, but he insisted he just needed to sleep. As I gathered my things to leave, I noticed a wine glass on his kitchen counter with lipstick marks around the rim. The color was a deep burgundy shade that I'd never worn. I preferred lighter, more natural tones. When I asked about it, he glanced over and shrugged. "Must be from the cleaning lady. She was here earlier today." But his cleaning lady was a 60-year-old woman who wore no makeup and definitely wouldn't be drinking wine during her work hours. The next evening, I tried calling him around 7, our usual check-in time. The call went straight to voicemail. When I tried again an hour later, he answered but sounded distracted and breathless. "Hey, sorry I missed your call earlier. I was at the gym and left my phone in the locker." "Which gym?" I asked casually. "I thought your usual place closed at 6 on Wednesdays." There was a pause before he answered. "I tried that new place downtown, the one with the later hours." I knew the gym he was referring to. It had closed permanently 3 months ago. I'd read about it in the local business journal at work. Friday afternoon, I decided to surprise him at his office with coffee and pastries from the bakery near my work. His assistant told me he'd left early for a personal appointment and wouldn't be back that day. When I called his cell phone, he answered after several rings. "Where are you?" I asked. "I stopped by your office." "Oh, I had to run an errand for my mother. Family stuff, you know how it is." But his mother lived in Florida and rarely required errands that couldn't be handled over the phone. When I suggested we meet for an early dinner since he was already out, he declined. "I'm pretty far uptown right now." Rain check? That evening, I drove past his apartment and saw his car in the parking garage. Whatever errand he'd been running hadn't taken him far uptown at all. The most unsettling incident happened 3 days later. I went to his apartment Saturday morning with fresh bagels and the newspaper, planning to spend a lazy morning together. Using my key, I found the apartment unusually quiet. I called his name but got no response. His bedroom door was closed, which was unusual. I knocked softly and heard movement inside, but he didn't answer immediately. When he finally opened the door, he was wearing only a towel and blocking my view into the room. "I was just getting out of the shower," he said, not making eye contact. "Can I come in? I brought breakfast. Actually, I'm feeling pretty sick again today. Maybe you should give me some space to recover." For the first time in our relationship, he didn't invite me into his own bedroom. When I tried to step around him to set my purse on his dresser like I had hundreds of times before, he physically blocked my path. "I really think I'm contagious," he insisted. "I don't want you to catch whatever this is." As I left his apartment that morning, confused and hurt, I couldn't shake the feeling that nothing about his behavior made sense. The man I'd been planning to marry was treating me like a stranger, and I had no idea why. 2 days before the wedding, I went to my mother's house to collect some documents my father needed for the ceremony. The marriage license, the rings we'd stored in her safe, and the special Bible that had been in our family for 3 generations. It was supposed to be a quick trip, grab the items and head back to the church for the final rehearsal. My mother wasn't home, but I had a key and knew exactly where everything was stored. The documents were in her bedroom safe, hidden behind a painting that had hung in the same spot since my childhood. As I knelt to open the safe, I noticed something on her nightstand that made me pause. It was a small leather journal I'd never seen before, placed carelessly next to her reading glasses and water glass. The cover was expensive looking, the kind of journal someone gives as a romantic gift, rather than something you'd buy for yourself at a drugstore. I shouldn't have opened it. I knew that even as my hands moved toward it, even as I told myself I was just curious about my mother's new interest in journaling. The first page was dated 3 months ago, exactly when the strange incidents with my fiancé had begun. March 15th. He brought me flowers today. White tulips. My favorite, though I never told him that. Somehow he just knew. We talked for hours about literature, about life, about dreams we've never shared with anyone else. I feel like I'm waking up after years of sleepwalking. My blood ran cold as I read those words in my mother's careful handwriting. The flowers, the intimate conversation, the timing, it all pointed to something I couldn't bring myself to believe. I flipped to the next entry. March 22nd. The guilt is eating me alive, but I can't stop thinking about him. When he kissed me today, I felt more alive than I have in 20 years of marriage. We both know this is wrong, but neither of us seems able to stop. He says he's never felt this way about anyone, that what he has with Rebecca is comfortable but not passionate. I should tell him to stay away, but I'm too selfish. I want to feel wanted again. The journal fell from my hands onto the carpet as the full horror of what I was reading sank in. My mother was having an affair with my fiancé. The man I was supposed to marry in 2 days had been sleeping with my mother for months. With trembling hands, I picked up the journal and continued reading, each entry more devastating than the last. April 5th. We made love in my bed today while Rebecca was at work and her father was at the church. Afterward, he held me and said he wished things were different, that he wished he'd met me first. I know I should feel ashamed, but lying in his arms felt like the most natural thing in the world. April 18th. Rebecca showed me her final dress-fitting photos today. She looked so beautiful, so happy, so trusting. I wanted to tell her the truth, but how can I destroy her life for my own happiness? He says we can continue after the wedding, that marriages of convenience are common in his social circle. I hate myself for even considering it. May 10th. We've started planning how to maintain our relationship after the wedding. He'll have legitimate reasons to visit often. Family dinners, holidays, helping with home repairs. Rebecca will never suspect because she trusts us both completely. Sometimes I think she's too trusting for her own good. Entry after entry detailed their affair with clinical precision. The locations where they met, the lies they told me, the future they were planning while I prepared to marry him in complete ignorance. My mother wrote about their intimate moments with a passion I'd never heard her express about my father, about their plans to continue deceiving me indefinitely, about how my trusting nature made their betrayal easier to execute. The final entry was dated yesterday, June 20th. Tomorrow is the wedding. He came over this morning for what we agreed would be our last time together before the ceremony. We both cried afterward, holding each other like teenagers saying goodbye before college. He promised that after a respectable honeymoon period, we'd find a way to be together again. I feel like I'm attending my daughter's funeral instead of her wedding, but I can't give him up. I won't give him up. I sat on my mother's bedroom floor, surrounded by the evidence of the most comprehensive betrayal I could imagine. Not only was my fiancé cheating on me, but he was doing it with my own mother. Not only was my mother betraying her marriage, but she was betraying her daughter in the cruelest way possible. They had planned this deception together, calculated exactly how to continue their affair after my wedding, and documented their betrayal in my mother's own handwriting. The man I loved and the woman who gave me life had conspired to make me the unknowing third party in their love triangle. I left my mother's house with the journal clutched in my hands and drove straight to the Marriott downtown, where I checked into a room under my maiden name. I couldn't go home to my apartment. Too many memories of planning our future together. I couldn't go to my father's. Not until I decided what to tell him. I needed space to think, to plan, to figure out how to respond to the most devastating betrayal of my life. Sitting on the hotel bed, I read through the journal 3 more times, making sure I hadn't misunderstood anything. But there was no ambiguity in my mother's words. She detailed their affair with the precision of someone keeping a record for posterity. Dates, locations, conversations, intimate moments, everything was documented with cruel clarity. My first instinct was to call them both, to scream, to demand explanations. But as I sat in that anonymous hotel room, something shifted inside me. The shock began to crystallize into something harder, more focused. They had planned this betrayal methodically, documenting their deception, plotting how to continue fooling me after my wedding. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. It was a calculated campaign of deceit. They deserved a calculated response. I spent the entire night planning. I made lists, analyzed evidence, and considered every possible outcome. By morning, I knew exactly what I was going to do. First, I called my office and took a personal day. Then I went to a print shop and made copies of the most damning journal pages, the ones that explicitly detailed their affair and their plans to continue it after my marriage. I sealed the copies in an envelope and stored them in the hotel safe as backup evidence. Next, I called the photographer and made a special request. I told him I wanted to surprise the guest with a slideshow during the reception, personal photos and messages from people who couldn't attend. He was delighted with the idea and agreed to set up the projection system. I spent hours creating that slideshow. Along with genuine family photos and sweet messages from distant relatives, I embedded photographs of my mother's journal pages. Not enough to overwhelm the presentation, but enough to ensure that every single person at my wedding would understand exactly what kind of people they were celebrating. Then I called my father. Not to tell him about the affair. That conversation needed to happen in person, but to ask him to meet me at the hotel that evening. I told him I needed to discuss something important about the ceremony. When my father arrived, I showed him the journal. I watched his face transform from confusion to disbelief to devastation as he read his wife's detailed account of her betrayal. He aged 10 years in 10 minutes, his shoulders sagging under the weight of what he was learning. "How long have you known?" he asked quietly. "Since yesterday afternoon. I found it when I went to get the marriage documents." We sat in silence for several minutes before he spoke again. "What do you want to do?" "I want to expose them, publicly, in front of everyone who thinks they're good, moral people." My father, who had preached about forgiveness and turning the other cheek for 30 years, nodded slowly. "They made their choices," he said. "They can live with the consequences." We spent the rest of the evening planning exactly how the revelation would unfold. My father would perform the ceremony normally until we reached the vows. Then, instead of exchanging traditional promises, I would address the congregation directly. "Are you sure about this?" my father asked as he prepared to leave. "Once you do this, there's no going back." "They made that choice for me when they decided to betray everything we're supposed to mean to each other," I replied. "I'm just refusing to be a victim of their lies." That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. For the first time since finding the journal, I felt like I had some control over my own life. Tomorrow I would stand in front of 200 people and tell the truth. Not their carefully crafted version of reality, but the actual truth. I wasn't going to quietly disappear or privately confront them in some tearful family meeting. They had chosen to make their betrayal elaborate and public by planning to continue it throughout my marriage. They deserved an equally public response. The morning of my wedding, I woke up at 6 with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. No pre-wedding jitters, no butterflies, no last-minute doubts about my dress or hair. Just a calm, focused determination to see my plan through to completion. I ordered room service, fresh fruit, yogurt, and coffee, and ate slowly while reviewing my speech one final time. I'd written it the night before, timing it to last exactly 3 minutes. Long enough to deliver all the essential facts, short enough to finish before anyone could stop me. At 9, my bridesmaids arrived at the hotel for the getting ready portion of the day. 3 women I'd known since college, all excited to be part of what they thought was the happiest day of my life. I smiled and laughed with them as they helped me into my dress, applied my makeup, and arranged my hair in the elaborate updo my mother had insisted upon. "You look absolutely radiant," said my maid of honor, fastening my grandmother's pearl necklace around my throat. "I've never seen you so calm before a big event." She was right. I felt completely at peace with what was about to happen. The wedding photographer arrived at 10 to capture the pre-ceremony moments. I posed for the traditional shots, putting on my shoes, holding my bouquet, looking pensively out the window. All the images that were supposed to document a bride's anticipation and joy. Instead, they were documenting my preparation for war. At 11:30, my father arrived to escort me to the cathedral. The moment he saw me in my full wedding regalia, his composure cracked slightly. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly, taking my hands in his. "We can call it off right now. Tell everyone you're sick, or that you've changed your mind. No one would blame you." "I need to do this," I replied, straightening his tie with steady hands. "They planned their betrayal. I get to plan my response." He nodded, understanding that this was about more than just ending a relationship. This was about reclaiming my dignity and refusing to be the naive victim in someone else's story. In the limousine on the way to the cathedral, I tucked the copied journal pages into my bouquet, securing them between the roses with ribbon. My something old, something new, something borrowed, something blue, and something true. The cathedral looked exactly as my mother had envisioned, white lilies everywhere, candles flickering along the aisle, soft classical music filling the soaring space. 200 guests filled the pews, dressed in their finest clothes, chattering excitedly about the beautiful ceremony they were about to witness. I stood in the vestibule, watching through the partially open doors as my mother took her seat in the front row. She was wearing the navy blue dress we'd chosen together, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief as if she were genuinely moved by the occasion. The performance was flawless, the picture of a proud mother on her daughter's wedding day. My fiancé stood at the altar in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, adjusting his cufflinks nervously as he waited for me to appear. From this distance, he looked like every woman's dream groom, handsome, successful, from a good family. The congregation probably thought he was nervous about the magnitude of the commitment he was making. They had no idea he'd already made his real commitment to someone else. 5 minutes, whispered the wedding coordinator, a efficient woman in a black suit who'd managed dozens of ceremonies in this cathedral. "Are you ready?" I looked at myself in the full-length mirror one last time. The woman staring back at me looked beautiful, composed, ready for anything. My dress was perfect, my makeup flawless, my hair arranged exactly as planned. I looked like a bride who was about to have the wedding of her dreams. Instead, I was about to give 200 people a story they'd never forget. "I'm ready," I told the coordinator. My father appeared beside me, offering his arm. His face was grave but determined. He'd spent the morning preparing himself for what was about to happen, and I could see he was ready to support me completely. "Last chance to change your mind," he murmured as the music shifted to signal the processional was about to begin. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life," I replied. The doors opened fully, and I saw the entire congregation turn to look at me. 200 faces filled with anticipation and joy, ready to celebrate what they thought was a beautiful love story. In the front row, my mother pressed her handkerchief to her eyes, playing her role perfectly. At the altar, my fiancé smiled that charming smile that had once made me believe in fairy tales. I took my first step down the aisle, my father's steady presence beside me. With each step, I could feel the weight of the journal pages hidden in my bouquet, the evidence that would shatter the illusion everyone was living in, including myself until yesterday. The wedding march played, and guests smiled and waved as I passed. Some wiped away tears, thinking they were witnessing a beautiful moment. Others took photos, wanting to capture what they believed was pure joy. They were about to witness something entirely different. Not a wedding, but a reckoning. Not a celebration of love, but an exposure of betrayal. Not the beginning of a marriage, but the end of lies. As I approached the altar, I caught my fiancé's eye. He was looking at me with what appeared to be genuine affection, as if he'd somehow convinced himself that marrying me while planning to continue his affair with my mother was an act of love rather than cruelty. In 30 seconds, his carefully constructed world was going to collapse. I reached the altar and took my place beside my fiancé, who leaned over to whisper, "You look absolutely beautiful." His voice carried genuine warmth, as if he'd completely compartmentalized his betrayal from this moment. My father began the ceremony with his usual grace and dignity. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness the union of two souls in holy matrimony." His voice was steady, giving no indication of what was about to unfold. The congregation settled into their seats. Smiling and attentive, I could see my mother in the front row, beaming with what appeared to be maternal pride. My fiancé's family filled the opposite side, looking pleased with their son's choice of bride. Everyone was playing their assigned roles perfectly. My father continued through the opening prayers and readings, his voice carrying the authority of 30 years in the pulpit. When we reached the section about the sanctity of marriage and the importance of honesty between spouses, I saw him glance at me almost imperceptibly. It was time. "Now," my father said, his voice taking on a more solemn tone, "before we proceed with the vows, Rebecca has something she would like to share with all of you." A murmur of surprise rippled through the congregation. This wasn't part of the traditional ceremony format, and guests began to sit up straighter, curious about what was coming. I turned to face the assembled crowd, my bouquet steady in my hands. 200 faces looked back at me expectantly, thinking they were about to hear a romantic personal message, or perhaps a tribute to deceased grandparents. "Thank you all for being here today," I began, my voice carrying clearly through the cathedral's excellent acoustics. "I know many of you traveled long distances to celebrate what you believed would be the happiest day of my life." I paused, letting that past tense sink in. A few people exchanged glances, sensing something was different about my tone. Unfortunately, I discovered something 2 days ago that changes everything. I reached into my bouquet and withdrew the journal pages, unfolding them carefully. My mother has been keeping a detailed record of her 3-month affair with my fiancé. The silence that followed was absolute. Not a cough, not a rustle of clothing, not even the sound of breathing. 200 people sat frozen in their seats, processing what they'd just heard. My fiancé's face went white, then red, then white again. "Rebecca, what are you doing?" he whispered urgently. I ignored him and continued, reading directly from my mother's journal. March 15th. "He brought me flowers today. White tulips, my favorite, though I never told him that. We talked for hours about literature, about life, about dreams we've never shared with anyone else." My mother half rose from her seat, her face a mask of horror. "Rebecca, stop this immediately." April 5th, I continued reading, my voice growing stronger with each word. "We made love in my bed today while Rebecca was at work and her father was at the church. Afterward, he held me and said he wished things were different, that he wished he'd met me first." Gasps erupted throughout the cathedral. People began turning to stare at my mother and my fiancé, their faces showing shock, disgust, and fascination in equal measure. My fiancé grabbed my arm. "You're making a mistake." "Let me explain." I pulled away from him and read the final entry. June 20th. "Tomorrow is the wedding." We both cried afterward, holding each other like teenagers. He promised that after a respectable honeymoon period, we'd find a way to be together again. I feel like I'm attending my daughter's funeral instead of her wedding. The cathedral erupted in chaos. People were standing, shouting, pulling out their phones to record what was happening. My fiancé's mother screamed, "This is impossible!" My mother's friends stared at her in horror as she collapsed back into the pew, sobbing. "They plan to continue their affair throughout my marriage," I announced over the noise. This journal documents their betrayal in my mother's own handwriting. Every lie they told me, every deception they planned, every moment they chose their selfish desires over my well-being. I set the journal pages on the altar and faced my fiancé directly. Did you really think I was too stupid to figure it out eventually? Too trusting to notice the signs? Too weak to do anything about it? He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He looked like a man watching his entire life implode in real time. I turned back to the congregation one final time. The chaos had settled into a horrified silence as people waited to see what I would do next. I want everyone here to understand something, I said, my voice carrying to every corner of the cathedral. I could have handled this privately. I could have quietly called off the wedding, let them save face, protected their reputations. But they chose to document their betrayal. They chose to plan a future of continued deception. They chose to make me an unknowing participant in their sick game. I walked down the altar steps, my wedding dress trailing behind me like a queen's train. So I chose to respond publicly. Everyone who thought they were celebrating a beautiful love story deserves to know they were actually enabling a cruel deception. My mother finally found her voice. Rebecca, please. I can explain everything. You don't understand. I understand perfectly, I cut her off. I understand that you betrayed your daughter, your marriage, and every value you claim to represent. I understand that he betrayed our relationship, his promises to me, and the trust of everyone who believed in him. Most importantly, I understand that I deserve better than both of you. I turned to my father, who had watched the entire scene unfold with quiet dignity. Thank you for supporting me today. It means everything. He nodded, his eyes filled with pride and sadness in equal measure. I began walking back down the aisle, my head held high as I passed 200 stunned guests. Some tried to reach out to me with words of support. Others sat in shocked silence. But most were already pulling out their phones to share what they'd just witnessed. My fiancé's voice called out behind me. Rebecca, wait, we can work this out. I made a mistake, but I love you. I didn't turn around or break my stride. You don't love me, I called back without looking. You love the idea of having us both, but that was never your choice to make. As I reached the back of the cathedral, I could hear the explosion of voices behind me. Arguments, accusations, shocked conversations, the sound of people choosing sides in real time. My mother's sobs echoed off the stone walls. My fiancé was apparently trying to explain himself to his family, whose voices rose in anger and disgust. Outside the cathedral, the afternoon sun was brilliant and warm. I stood on the steps for a moment, breathing in the fresh air and feeling lighter than I had in months. Behind me, the chaos continued as guests streamed out of the building, some trying to offer support, others clearly just eager to spread the gossip. My best friend from college reached me first. Rebecca, oh my God, are you okay? Where are you going to go? I'm going to be fine, I told her, meaning it completely. I'm going to be better than fine. Within hours, the story had spread across social media. Videos of the ceremony reveal were shared thousands of times. My mother's carefully cultivated reputation as a devoted pastor's wife crumbled overnight. My fiancé's law firm began receiving calls asking about his character and judgment. Their betrayal, which they'd thought was a secret affair, became a public scandal that followed them everywhere. The wedding that was supposed to be the beginning of my perfect life instead became the moment I chose to value myself over everyone else's comfort. I learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to be a victim of other people's selfishness. And for the first time in my adult life, I was completely free to discover who I really was, when I wasn't trying to please people who didn't deserve my devotion. 6 months later, I was living in a sunny apartment in Portland, Oregon, 2,000 miles away from the wreckage of my former life. I'd taken a senior editor position at a small but prestigious publishing house that specialized in contemporary women's fiction, stories about resilience, transformation, and finding strength in unexpected places. My new life was simple but deeply satisfying. I worked with authors who wrote about complicated heroines making difficult choices. I lived alone for the first time since college and discovered I genuinely enjoyed my own company. My apartment had large windows, hardwood floors, and bookshelves from floor to ceiling. I'd furnished it entirely according to my own taste. No input from well-meaning family members or partners who thought they knew better than I did what would make me happy. The first 3 months had been challenging. The story of my wedding revelation had followed me online, making dating feel impossible and job interviews awkward. But eventually, people stopped recognizing me as that woman from the wedding video, and I could build a reputation based on my work rather than my personal drama. My father had visited twice, both times looking healthier and more at peace than I'd seen him in years. He'd filed for divorce from my mother a week after the wedding, citing irreconcilable differences and betrayal of marital vows. The divorce was finalized 4 months later, and he'd since started seeing a kind widow from his congregation, someone who appreciated his integrity rather than exploiting it. "I should thank you," he told me during his second visit, as we sat in my favorite coffee shop overlooking the river. "You gave me permission to admit that my marriage had been making me miserable for years. I was so focused on the idea that good Christians work through everything that I never asked myself whether I deserved to be happy." I'd received exactly 3 communication attempts from my mother in 6 months. The first was a 10-page letter delivered 2 weeks after the wedding, filled with justifications, excuses, and requests for forgiveness that felt more about her guilt than my healing. I read it once and threw it away. The second was a voicemail on my birthday, crying and begging me to call her back so she could explain everything properly. I deleted it without listening to the entire message. The third was a package containing family photos and jewelry she thought I might want, along with a note saying she understood why I was angry, but hoped someday I could forgive her. I donated the jewelry to charity and kept one photo, a picture of me and my father at my college graduation, both of us beaming with genuine joy. It was the only family photo where my mother wasn't present, and therefore the only one that didn't make me feel sick to look at. My former fiancé had attempted contact more frequently and more desperately. He'd tried calling, texting, showing up at my old apartment, and even having mutual friends reach out on his behalf. All of his messages followed the same pattern: initial apologies, followed by explanations about how the affair just happened, then anger when I didn't respond, then bargaining about how we could work through this together. His final message, sent 4 months after the wedding, was a rambling email about how he'd realized he'd made the biggest mistake of his life and was willing to do anything to win me back. He claimed he'd ended things with my mother immediately after the wedding and was in therapy to understand why he'd betrayed me so completely. I read the entire message, then blocked his email address without responding. He didn't deserve my forgiveness, my anger, or my attention. He deserved to be forgotten. The most surprising part of my new life was how little I missed either of them. I'd expected to feel sad, lonely, or angry most of the time. Instead, I felt relieved. The constant low-level anxiety I'd carried throughout my engagement, always wondering if I was good enough, smart enough, interesting enough, had disappeared completely. I no longer had to perform the role of the perfect daughter or the ideal fiancé. I could just be Rebecca, figuring out what I wanted without anyone else's input or approval. 1 year after my wedding, that never was. I stood in front of 300 women at the Portland Convention Center, delivering a keynote speech titled, "Choosing Truth Over Comfort: Why Self-Respect is Never Selfish." The speaking engagement had come about unexpectedly. A women's leadership organization had contacted me after reading an essay I'd published in a national magazine about recognizing betrayal and refusing to be a victim. They wanted someone to talk about making difficult choices in the face of personal crisis. "A year ago, I thought my life was perfect," I told the audience, my voice steady and confident. I had a successful career, a beautiful wedding planned, and what I believed was a loving family supporting me. I also had a fiancé who was having an affair with my mother, but I was too trusting to see it. The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word. When I discovered their betrayal 2 days before my wedding, I had a choice. I could handle it privately, quietly, in a way that protected their reputations and maintained family peace. Or I could choose honesty, messy, painful, public honesty that would expose the truth and force everyone to confront reality. I paused, looking out at the sea of faces, women of all ages who had faced their own moments of crisis and decision. I chose truth, and it was the most liberating choice I've ever made. I spent the next 45 minutes sharing what I'd learned about self-respect, about the difference between kindness and enabling, about the courage it takes to disappoint people who don't have your best interests at heart. The response was overwhelming. A standing ovation, followed by a line of women wanting to share their own stories of choosing difficult truths over comfortable lies. After the event, I drove home to my apartment where I'd built a life that was entirely my own. No compromises, no committee decisions, no trying to be the person others wanted me to be. I had plants I'd chosen because I liked them, books arranged according to my own system, food in my refrigerator that reflected my actual tastes rather than someone else's preferences. I'd started dating again 3 months ago, carefully, selectively, with clear boundaries about what I would and wouldn't accept. The man I was seeing was a literature professor at Portland State University who appreciated my independence and had never once suggested I was too intense or too demanding for knowing my worth. My career was thriving in ways it never had when I was planning my life around someone else's schedule and priorities. I'd been promoted twice and was considering starting my own literary consulting business. I'd also begun writing a book about my experience. Not a memoir of victimhood, but a practical guide for women who found themselves in similar situations. My relationship with my father had never been stronger. He'd remarried 6 months ago to the widow from his congregation, and their happiness was a joy to witness. He'd called me the morning after his wedding to tell me how proud he was of the courage I'd shown, how my choice to stand up for myself had given him permission to do the same. As for my mother and former fiancé, I occasionally heard updates through mutual acquaintances. Their affair had lasted exactly 3 weeks after my wedding revelation. Apparently, reality was less appealing than fantasy. My mother had moved to Florida to live near her sister, unable to face the social consequences of her actions in our hometown. My former fiancé had left his law firm and moved to Chicago, supposedly to start fresh, but more likely to escape the reputation he'd earned. Neither of them had succeeded in rebuilding the lives they'd destroyed in pursuit of their selfish desires. The affair that had seemed worth risking everything for had evaporated under public scrutiny, leaving them both alone with the consequences of their choices. I felt neither satisfaction nor sympathy about their outcomes. They had become irrelevant to my story the moment I chose to value myself over their comfort. Sitting in my apartment that evening, surrounded by books I loved and plans I'd made independently, I realized that my revenge had never been about destroying them. It had been about refusing to be destroyed by them. My revenge was this life, free, authentic, and entirely my own. My revenge was discovering that I was stronger, more interesting, and more capable than I'd ever known when I was trying to be perfect for people who didn't deserve my perfection. The woman who had stood at that altar a year ago, devastated and betrayed, had been transformed into someone who would never again accept less than she deserved. And that transformation was worth more than any marriage built on lies could have ever been.